She was 11 years old, standing in the August heat, with bruises she'd learned to hide, and a question no child should ever know to ask. He was a Marine who came home from 2 wars, only to lose the one against himself. Neither of them was supposed to be at that gas station. Neither of them was supposed to matter to the other. But the moment Rowan Creed looked down at Kelsey Hart and recognized the survival math in her eyes, the careful calculation of exactly how much pain to show and how much to bury, something inside him that had been locked for 15 years broke open like a fault line. What followed wasn't a rescue. It was something older than that, something the law couldn't order and the system couldn't manufacture. It was a brotherhood of broken men deciding one more time that the world's most forgotten people deserve someone to stand between them and the dark. If you've ever felt like no one was coming, stay with me, because this story is for you. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments below, and let's go. The gas station had no name anymore. Whatever letters had once spelled it out across the faded sign above the pump canopy had surrendered one by one to desert wind and neglect, leaving only a rusted bracket and a single surviving S that seemed to mock the concept of identity. The pump still worked, barely. The kind of place that existed not because anyone chose it, but because the highway didn't offer anything else for 60 miles in either direction. And the highway was the kind that trucks used when they wanted to avoid the scales on the interstate. Rowan Creed pulled off State Route 9 at 11:47 in the morning because his Harley Softail was running lean and the heat was doing something to the fuel mixture he didn't want to push through another hour of open blacktop. The temperature had been climbing since dawn. It was the kind of August that felt personal, like the desert had decided to make an argument. He cut the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence, letting the tick of cooling metal be the only sound. His hands came off the grip slowly. They always did now. 3 years out of the Marines, and his hands still hadn't learned that they were allowed to relax. Occupational damage, his VA counselor called it. Rowan called it something else on bad nights, but he'd stopped saying it out loud. He was 41 years old. He looked like 50 felt. The kind of face that had been handsome once, but had been rearranged by sun and wind and the particular gravity of men who carry things they won't put down. His leather cut was dark brown, almost black with age. The patch on the back, a lantern with its flame bent hard to the left, as if caught in a permanent storm. Worn smooth at the edges. No rank insignia. He wasn't a sergeant-at-arms or a road captain anymore. He was just a man who still wore the cut, because taking it off felt like removing a load-bearing wall. He was filling the tank when he heard the sound. Not heard, registered. The difference mattered. A Marine learns to register things before the conscious mind decides they're worth attention, and what registered was the particular quality of footsteps. Small, deliberate, too deliberate for a child. Children who feel safe don't calculate their footfalls. Children who feel safe trip over their own feet and don't care. He didn't turn around immediately. He watched the fuel gauge and listened, and after 4 seconds he knew she'd stop behind him and slightly to the left, which was the position of someone who'd identified the exit before choosing to approach. He taught that to Marines. He hadn't expected to see it in a kid. "Excuse me." He turned. She was maybe 11. Dark hair pulled into a braid that had survived 3 days past its last rebraiding, the loose strands framing a face that should have been round with summer and sugar and the particular carelessness of children on school break. It wasn't. It was careful. It was the face of someone who had learned that expressions could trigger consequences and had begun to manage them accordingly. She wore a long-sleeve shirt in August. Green. The sleeves came all the way to her wrists. Her left foot bore slightly less weight than her right. It was subtle. An orthopedic detail that most people wouldn't catch and that she had clearly practiced concealing. "Can I help you?" Rowan said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. It usually did around children, some automatic calibration he couldn't explain. She looked at him for a moment with eyes that were doing the same kind of assessment his were, measuring, calculating odds. "Do you know where the police that helps kids is?" she asked. He replaced the fuel cap without looking away from her. "Say that again." "The police that helps kids. She said it without inflection, like a phrase she had rehearsed but wasn't sure she'd gotten right. Not the regular police, the one that helps when it's at home. He crouched down, which put him lower than her eye level. An old instinct. He'd learned in Fallujah that getting below someone's eye line was the fastest way to signal that you weren't a threat. It worked on frightened civilians. It worked on children. It worked on dogs. It was possibly the most useful thing the Marine Corps had ever taught him. "You mean Child Protective Services?" he said. She looked at the ground briefly, then back at him. "Do they come fast?" "Depends on the call," he said honestly. He'd been trained to lie to civilians when the truth was worse than useful. He couldn't do it to her. Sometimes fast, sometimes not. She processed that. The calculation behind her eyes was visible in the way her jaw tightened, a micro-expression of private disappointment. She had wanted a different answer, and she had known she probably wasn't going to get one. "Okay," she said. She turned to leave. "Hey," Rowan said. She stopped but didn't turn fully, which was the body language of someone prepared to run. "What's your name?" A pause. "Kelsey." "Kelsey, is somebody hurting you?" The silence that followed lasted about 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, something complicated moved across the back of her careful face. Not surprise, because she'd clearly anticipated the question, but something heavier. The specific weight of a decision. Like she'd been carrying this particular stone for so long that the idea of setting it down had become both desperate and terrifying. "I have to go," she said. "Okay," Rowan said. He didn't reach for her. He didn't stand. He stayed crouched in the gas station asphalt heat and watched her walk away with that subtly weighted left foot back toward the frontage road, back toward whatever waited for her down the street. He didn't move for a full minute after she disappeared around the corner. Then he put on his helmet, started the Harley, and followed her. Underscore, 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 underscore. He kept a block back. Not difficult in a town this size. Larimer Wells, population somewhere south of 4,000 and dropping. The kind of high desert community that had grown up around a mine and kept existing out of momentum long after the mine closed. The main drag was 6 blocks of storefronts with varying levels of defeat. A Dollar General. A taqueria that seemed to be operating out of pure stubbornness. And a gas station at each end like bookends on a collection no one had ever wanted. Kelsey walked without looking back. That itself told him something. Kids who were afraid of being followed looked back constantly. She wasn't afraid of being followed from the gas station. She was afraid of something that was already waiting where she was going. She turned off the main drag onto Oneida Street, then left again into a block of apartment buildings that had been built sometime in the late 70s, with the architectural philosophy of doing the minimum necessary to keep rain out. 3 stories, exterior stairs. Wrought iron railings gone the color of old blood with rust. The kind of complex that cycled through tenants quarterly because nobody stayed who could afford to leave. She went up the exterior stairs to the 2nd floor, 2nd unit from the end, and paused outside the door. Rowan watched from the street, engine idling low, half a block down in the shade of a dying cottonwood. He watched her pause outside that door. He watched her shoulders do something, a settling, a bracing, the particular posture of someone preparing to enter a space where the atmosphere was unpredictable. It was the posture of soldiers going through doors. He knew it down to his bone. She went inside. He pulled the Harley up to the building and cut the engine and sat there for a moment with the August heat pressing down on everything like a hand. Then he walked to the exterior stairs. Underscore, 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 underscore. He wasn't going to go in. He told himself that clearly. He was going to listen for 30 seconds, determine the situation was manageable, call someone who had actual authority over this, and right away. That was the rational sequence of events. That was the version of this story where he remained a private citizen having a bad morning, rather than a former Marine making choices that had legal and physical consequences. He made it to the second-floor landing. The window beside the door had a broken blind, 3 slats bent outward at different angles, which created gaps that a person standing on the landing could see through without being visible from inside. Rowan was not the first person to notice this. He suspected Kelsey had noticed it long ago in the opposite direction, that she'd stood inside looking out through those gaps, trying to see what was coming before it arrived. He looked through. He saw a living room that had the specific entropy of a place where one person's disorder had overrun everyone else's attempts at order. Fast food containers on a coffee table, empty beer cans, a television on a milk crate showing a sports broadcast with the sound down, and a man, mid-30s, thick through the shoulders, wearing a sleeveless shirt that displayed forearm tattoos of the decorative rather than meaningful variety, standing in the middle of the room holding a leather belt by the buckle end. Kelsey was against the far wall. She was not looking at him. She was looking at a fixed point on the floor to the right of his left foot, which Rowan recognized as the practiced gaze of someone who had learned that eye contact could be interpreted as challenge. She had come in and been intercepted before she'd made it 10 feet. Whatever she'd been out doing, going to the gas station, trying to find help, she'd been gone too long or come back without whatever she'd been sent for, and the math of this man's grievance was already in process. Rowan watched him say something. He couldn't hear the words through the glass, but he could read the shape of it, the particular economy of a man who'd made this speech before and no longer bothered with the full version. He watched Kelsey's shoulders drop incrementally with each word, that practiced collapse, the body making itself small. Then the man raised the belt. Rowan's hand was on the door handle. His whole body was momentum and 15 years of trained response and a rage so old it had become structural, load-bearing, the thing that held him upright in a different way than courage did. He stopped. Not because he didn't want to go through that door, because he'd been through enough doors to know what happened next. He knew exactly what would happen if he went through that door right now. He'd been in enough villages, enough compounds, enough back alleys to know the sequence. The man inside was bigger than average and clearly comfortable with violence. Rowan could handle him same way, but not cleanly, not quietly, not without Kelsey witnessing something that would replace one set of nightmares with another. And when the police came, because they would come, what they'd find was an unregistered motorcycle, an out-of-state veteran with a sealed juvenile record he'd managed to keep sealed for 20 years, and a child in an apartment where an adult male was bleeding on the floor. He knew what story that would become. He'd watched it become that story before. He took his hand off the door handle. It was the hardest thing he'd done since leaving the Corps. He went back down the stairs and stood next to his Harley in the August heat and took out his phone. He called Danny Crow. Underscore, 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 underscore. The phone rang 4 times, which was normal. Danny Crow did not answer phones as though they were urgent unless they demonstrably were, and he had an instinct for which category a call fell into before he picked up. Rowan. His voice was morning-roughed. A smoker's morning voice, though Danny hadn't smoked in 6 years. Some voices just kept the texture. I need the Brotherhood, Rowan said. A pause. Not hesitation. Danny Crow didn't hesitate. It was the pause of a man reorienting from whatever he'd been doing to complete attention. Where are you? Larimer Wells. Off Route 9. There's a kid. How old? 11, maybe. Girl. She's been at it a while, Danny, not recent. Another pause. Rowan could hear the sound of a chair and then boots on a floor. Danny was already standing. The man in the house? He local law? Nothing like that. Just a man. Wrong kind. You inside? No, I'm outside. I almost went in. Good that you didn't. I know. Send me the address. I'll call Mason Tig. How long do you need? Rowan looked up at the second-floor window. The blind was still. I need to know she's safe for the next few hours while you get here. I'm not leaving. Don't go in, Rowan. I know. I mean it. You go in there wrong and we can't help that child. You go in there and it becomes about you. I know, Danny. Send the address. He sent it. Then he found the narrow gap between the building and the utility fence that ran along the property line, and he sat down in the shade there with his back against the brick and his eyes on the exterior stairs, and he waited. This was also something the Marine Corps had taught him, waiting without resolution, staying in a bad place because leaving would make it worse. Most people couldn't do it. Most people needed movement, needed to feel like their discomfort was productive. Rowan had sat in worse places, hotter, louder, more lethal, and waited out things larger than this man with his leather belt. He could do it again. But his hands on his knees would not stop being fists. Underscore, 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 underscore. Danny Crow arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon with Mason Briggs riding beside him and Tig Okafor running sweep. 3 Harleys announcing themselves from 2 blocks away with the particular thunder that in a different context might mean danger, but which to Rowan sounded like oxygen. He came out from behind the utility fence as they pulled up. Danny was 53, gray at the temples, built like a man who had been large once and had lost the excess of it and kept only the architecture. He wore his cut with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned it through years rather than incident. His face was the kind that didn't reveal much because he'd decided long ago that revelation was a choice rather than a default. He looked at the building without expression. Second floor? Second unit from the end. Mason Briggs, mace to everyone, climbed off his bike and rolled his neck. He was younger than Danny, mid-40s, former Army medic, a man who'd come to the Brotherhood through a different route than most and stayed because the route back to ordinary life had gone somewhere he didn't recognize. He had forearms that bore the particular scarring of someone who had been through something with fire, and he wore them openly. He did not volunteer the story. "Child still inside?" Mace asked. "Far as I know, she went in around noon. It went quiet after about 20 minutes. Rowan didn't specify what it referred to. He didn't need to. Tig Okafor was the youngest of them at 38, black, compact, with the watchful eyes of a man who'd grown up in neighborhoods where situational awareness wasn't a habit but a condition of survival. He'd been with the Brotherhood 4 years. Before that, he'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan as a communications specialist and come home to a city that had changed while he was gone and hadn't bothered to explain itself. He didn't say anything. He looked at the building the way Rowan was looking at it, and then he looked at Rowan, and something passed between them that was acknowledgement without words. "We need eyes on the situation from a legal standpoint before any of us goes anywhere near that door," Danny said. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Evelyn." Evelyn Cross. Rowan had been expecting that. He nodded. Danny stepped away to make the call. Mace came to stand next to Rowan, and they both looked at the building. "She asked you for help," Mace said. "She asked me where the police that help kids was." Mace was quiet for a moment. "Smart kid." "Too smart," Rowan said. "The kind of smart you get from having to be." Mace nodded once. He understood the kind. Underscore, 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 underscore. Evelyn Cross arrived at 5:45 in a dark blue Ford that had 200,000 miles and a law school parking permit on the dash from 1997 that she'd never taken down. She was 67 years old, 4 feet 11 inches in shoes, with white hair cut short and blunt, and eyes that had the particular opacity of a person who'd spent 40 years in courtrooms and had learned to reveal exactly as much as she intended, and not one syllable more. She'd been a family law attorney. Past tense because she'd retired 6 years ago, but retirement in her case meant she no longer took fees. It did not mean she no longer took cases. She came to the Brotherhood 3 years ago through a different situation, not unlike this one, a different frightened child, a different man who'd mistaken legal vulnerability for immunity. She had not been asked to leave when that situation resolved. She had not left. She looked at the building. She looked at Rowan. "Tell me everything." He told her. She listened with her arms folded and her eyes on the second-floor window, and when he was done, she asked 3 questions. The abuser's name if known, the length of time Kelsey appeared to have been in residence, and whether Rowan had any direct documentation of what he'd witnessed. He had his phone. He had not thought about his phone when he was at the window. He told her so. She made a sound that was not judgment. It doesn't matter. What you observed is admissible as witness testimony if we do this right. She turned to Danny. I need to know the child's last name. I need to know if there's a parent in the home and whether the legal guardian situation is documented. Kelsey Hart, Rowan said. That's the name she gave me. The man inside. I don't know his relationship to her. That's what we're going to find out, Evelyn said, and she got back into her Ford and took out her laptop. The Brotherhood settled in. Mace brought out a thermos of coffee from one of the saddlebags. Danny leaned against his bike with his arms folded and his eyes on the street, doing the mathematics of approach. Tig walked the perimeter of the block once without appearing to be doing so, the way a man does when he's been trained to understand a space before he commits to being in it. Rowan remained at his post between the building and the fence. The August heat turned into August evening, and the sky over the high desert went the color of an old bruise, purple and amber, and the particular greenish-gray that came before the temperature finally dropped. Lights came on in the apartment building, the flickering fluorescent of the exterior stair fixture. Yellow rectangles of window light, domestic and indifferent. At 7:12, the door of the second unit apartment opened and the man came out. He stood on the landing for a moment, lit a cigarette, and looked out at the street with the unfocused gaze of someone who expected nothing and saw nothing. His eyes passed over Danny's motorcycle without catching on it. He went back inside. Rowan let out a breath he'd been holding for an unknown duration. She's still in there, Mace said quietly. Yeah. We'll get her out right, Mace said. Not fast. Right. Rowan looked at him. Mace was watching the window with the flat patience of a man who had once waited 48 hours in a forward operating base for an extraction window and filled the time by cataloging the cracks in a concrete ceiling. He was not worried about waiting. He was worried about the same thing Rowan was worried about, and he was managing it the same way, by trusting the process over the impulse. Evelyn's running his name now, Danny said, coming up quietly on Rowan's right. Raymond Stoller. He's on a lease at that address for 16 months. Kelsey's mother is listed as a secondary tenant. Name is Dana Hart. Where is she? That's what we're working on. Danny's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She's not at the address. Evelyn's checking employment records. So he's alone with Kelsey. For now. The word for now was doing a lot of work. Rowan looked back at the window. He thought about a girl who had learned to walk with an injury and hadn't told anyone, who had learned what bruises could be covered with long sleeves in August, who had gone to a gas station and asked a stranger for the kind of police that helped when it was at home, which was a construction that suggested she'd tried other options and found them insufficient, or she'd been told enough about the system to know which corner of it she needed. 11 years old. She'd been running this survival calculus since before she was old enough for middle school. The fury in his chest was the clean, cold kind. Not the hot kind that made you dangerous to yourself. The cold kind that made you patient. Underscore, 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 underscore. At 9:15, Evelyn knocked on the window of Danny's car. He'd moved the Ford to a better vantage point. And he went to her. They spoke for 6 minutes. Then Danny came back and Rowan straightened instinctively. Mother's at a residential treatment facility in Callaway County, Danny said. Checked herself in 8 weeks ago. Voluntary admission for substance dependency. He said it without affect, without judgment, in the tone of a man reporting logistics. Stoller is not legally designated as Kelsey's guardian. He's the mother's boyfriend. The mother left Kelsey at the residence when she went into treatment. 8 weeks, Rowan said. 8 weeks. Kelsey's been alone with him for 8 weeks. Evelyn's already on the phone with the county duty worker. Emergency placement protocol. Danny paused. Evelyn also knows a judge. Of course she does. It might be morning before we have paper. Rowan looked at the building. She's going to be in there all night. I know. We can't leave. Nobody's leaving, Rowan. Danny's voice was level, absolute. The voice of a man who had never once in Rowan's knowledge said something he didn't mean. We rotate watches. Mace stays. I stay. You get a few hours, you come back. I'm not sleeping. Danny looked at him for a moment. He had known Rowan Creed for 11 years. He knew the history, all of it, including the parts that weren't in any file. He knew about the group home in Spokane. He knew about the man who'd been in charge of that group home and what that man had done before a 17-year-old Rowan Creed had decided the system was a fiction and disappeared into the country's vast indifference toward its unwanted children. No, Danny said. I don't suppose you are. They held the vigil through the night. Underscore, 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 underscore. At 2 a.m, Tig appeared at Rowan's shoulder with a gas station sandwich in a triangle package and set it down without comment on the wall beside him. Rowan didn't eat it for 40 minutes and then ate it without tasting it because Mace had pointed out quietly that a man needed his blood sugar if he was going to be functional in the morning, and Rowan had acknowledged the logic without agreeing with the framing. The apartment was dark. Had been dark since 10:30. Rowan watched the darkness and thought about a girl sleeping inside it and tried to calculate from the outside whether the darkness was safe or dangerous, and could not. That not knowing was its own specific torture. At 3:45, a light went on in the apartment. His whole body came alert. Mace appeared from somewhere to his left, quiet as a thought. The light was in the kitchen, a rectangle of yellow. After 7 minutes, it went off again. Glass of water. Bad dream. Someone getting up for reasons that were ordinary and unremarkable. He could not know which. The not knowing pressed down on him like the August heat had pressed down during the day, except the night had gone cool, and the not knowing had not. He pressed his back against the fence and stayed. Underscore, 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 underscore. At 5:48 in the morning, as the sky went from black to the particular purple gray that preceded dawn over the high desert, Evelyn Cross pulled up in her Ford with a paper in her hand and a look on her face that was the closest thing she had to triumph. Rowan was at the car before she opened the door. Emergency removal order, she said. She held it up. Signed 40 minutes ago. County caseworker is meeting us here at 6:30. She looked at him with those opaque eyes, and in them he saw something that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to it. The satisfaction of a woman who had spent 40 years fighting a system that mostly lost and had found, late in her life, a way to make it occasionally win. We're going to do this right, Rowan. He looked at the paper. Official seals. Signatures. The language of authority rendered on behalf of a child who hadn't known authority could be made to work for her. 6:30, he said. 6:30. He looked at the building. The sky behind it was turning. Inside that apartment, an 11-year-old girl with a long-sleeved shirt in August was either sleeping or lying awake in the dark, calculating the odds of a world she hadn't asked to be born into. She didn't know that outside, 4 men who had each been failed by something large had spent the night deciding that the math could come out differently this time. She didn't know that a retired attorney had called a judge at midnight, and that the judge, who also knew what it cost to do the right thing slowly, had signed his name while the desert was still cold. She didn't know any of it. The dawn came up orange and hard over the mesa, the way desert dawns always did, without ceremony, without gradation, just the sudden insistence of light. Danny Crow came to stand beside Rowan and looked at the building the way a man looks at something he intends to resolve. At 6:29, a county vehicle turned onto Onate Street, and Rowan Creed, who had spent 3 years failing to find a reason to stay in any one place long enough to matter, straightened his leather cut and walked toward the stairs. Not with rage, not with the hot certainty of a man who trusted his own fists, but with something slower and more durable than either. He walked with a piece of paper and 4 men at his back, and the particular conviction of someone who had finally found, in the architecture of a stranger's suffering, the shape of a purpose he could carry without breaking. He didn't know yet what he'd find when that door opened. He didn't know what Kelsey had been drawing in the notebook she carried everywhere. He didn't know what was in the pages she'd filled with the careful documentation of someone who had decided, at 11 years old, that if no one else was going to be a witness, she would witness herself. He didn't know that those drawings were going to change everything, not just for her, but for Raymond Stoller, and for a system that had been looking the other way for 8 weeks, and for a question that was going to surface by afternoon about exactly who had known, and how long and why the phone calls that should have been made had not been made. But that was still coming. Right now, on a cracked concrete landing in the first light of a desert morning, Evelyn Cross raised her hand and knocked on the door. The county caseworker's name was Brianna Taft, and she was 26 years old, which meant she had been doing this job for approximately 14 months and had not yet developed the particular scar tissue that either protected you from it or ended your career. She arrived at 6:29 with a manila folder under one arm and the look of someone who'd been awake since 4 and had substituted professionalism for sleep. She saw the 4 bikers on the landing and the parking lot, and she stopped walking for exactly 3 seconds. Evelyn Cross stepped forward before the 3 seconds became something worse. "Brianna, I'm Evelyn Cross. We spoke on the phone." She extended her hand with the authority of a woman who had learned that authority was sometimes more useful than credentials. "These men are with me." Brianna Taft looked at Evelyn, looked at the 4 men in leather cuts, made a private calculation, and shook the hand. "The order's valid," she said. It wasn't a question. She was confirming for herself. "Signed by Judge Arlo Watts at 5:14 this morning," Evelyn said. "I have the original." Brianna nodded once and looked at the door. "I go in first," she said. "Alone." "Agreed," Evelyn said. Rowan said nothing. He was standing 2 steps back from the landing, which was the position he'd been placed in by Danny's hand on his arm approximately 30 seconds ago. A quiet, non-negotiable repositioning that communicated everything without requiring words. "You're too close to this. Let her work." He stayed where he was. Brianna knocked. Official knock, knuckles, 3 times. "Mr. Stoller, this is Brianna Taft from Callaway County Child Services. I need to speak with you about Kelsey Hart." Silence. 20 seconds of it. Then the sound of movement inside, unhurried, which was its own information. A man who'd been asleep coming awake. The specific rhythm of someone who had been through enough official visits to know that panic was counterproductive, that the correct strategy was to answer the door as though you'd been awake for hours and expected company. The door opened. Raymond Stoller was not what the night had made him in Rowan's imagination. He was not larger or more menacing in daylight. He was just a man who was 37 years old and had the dull, settled look of someone who'd made choices that had calcified around him. He wore a t-shirt and jeans. His eyes, going from Brianna Taft to the paper she held to the 4 men behind her, moved with the calculation of someone rapidly running odds. "What is this?" he said. Not a question. "Mr. Stoller, I have an emergency removal order signed by Judge Watts. I need to see Kelsey now." His jaw shifted. His eyes came to Rowan's face and stayed there for 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Rowan understood that Stoller knew. Couldn't know exactly how, couldn't know the mechanics of the night, but knew that the man in the leather cut was the reason the county was at his door at 6:30 in the morning. "She's sleeping," Stoller said. "Wake her up," Brianna said. He didn't move. "I got rights here. I'm her—" "You're not listed as her guardian on any legal document in this county," Evelyn said, stepping forward with the smooth certainty of someone who'd had this conversation before and never lost it. "You are Dana Hart's boyfriend. You have no legal standing in this removal. If you obstruct a county official in the execution of a court order, Mr. Stoller, that becomes a different conversation. Would you like to have that conversation?" The silence that followed was the kind that had weight and temperature. Then Stoller stepped back from the door. Underscore, 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 underscore. Brianna went in. The four of them waited on the landing and in the parking lot below, and the desert morning got lighter around them, the air still carrying the night's cold, that particular high desert chill that burned off fast but was real while it lasted. Mace had his coffee thermos open again. Tig was watching the street. Danny was watching the door. Rowan was watching the space behind the door that he couldn't see into. It took 9 minutes. He knew because he counted them in a specific way he'd learned in the Corps, not by the clock, but by breathing. 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out. The kind of counting that kept a person functional when what they wanted to do was something that would resolve the situation in the next 30 seconds and ruin it for the next 30 years. Then the door opened again and Kelsey came out. She was wearing the same long-sleeved green shirt. She had a backpack on, small, the kind sold in drugstores, dark blue with a broken zipper on the front pocket. She was carrying it with both arms hugged across the front of it, the way children carry things they don't trust to straps. She had a notebook clutched against her chest under one arm, spiral-bound, its cover decorated with stickers that had been carefully applied and then carefully protected, as though the stickers were the last things she'd been able to control. She came through the door and saw Rowan and stopped. He hadn't planned what to say. He'd been a Marine and then a drifter, and the vocabulary of comfort had never been part of either training. He looked at her and she looked at him, and the notebook shifted slightly in her grip. "Hey, Kelsey," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the careful eyes of a child who had learned not to trust continuity, who had learned that the people who appeared to be safe had a half-life, that they became unreliable at moments you couldn't predict, that the safest policy was to treat every apparent rescue as provisional. "You followed me," she said. "Yeah." She considered that. Behind her, Brianna Taft was doing paperwork in the doorway, and Stoller was somewhere inside, invisible now, which was somehow worse. "Did you call them?" Kelsey asked, with a gesture that encompassed the bikers without quite looking at any of them. "I did," Rowan said. Another consideration. Why? It was the most direct question he'd been asked in years, and he felt the truthful answer arrive before the diplomatic one, which was unusual for him. "Because I know what that looks like," he said. "What you were doing, how you were walking, I know it from the inside." The notebook shifted again. Her jaw did something complicated. She did not cry. She looked like someone who had made a decision about crying some time ago and had not revisited it. "Okay," she said. It was the same word she'd used at the gas station, but it meant something different now. At the gas station, it had been a door closing. Now it was something tentative and fragile, something that had been left ajar. Underscore, 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 underscore. Brianna Taft took Kelsey in the county vehicle. That was protocol, and Evelyn had explained it to Rowan at 3 in the morning while he'd been staring at the apartment building. Protocol existed for reasons, and this was one of them. The Brotherhood did not follow the county vehicle. The Brotherhood dispersed, for now, with the agreement to reconvene at a truck stop on the edge of town that Tig had identified the previous evening as having both coffee and a back parking lot big enough for 4 Harleys and a private conversation. Rowan rode the half-mile with the specific exhaustion of a man who had been awake for 27 hours and was running on the kind of cellular attention that bypassed tired and went straight to something raw. He ordered black coffee and sat in a vinyl booth and did not look at the menu. Danny sat across from him. Mace and Tig took the booth behind them, which was how they often arrayed themselves in public. 2 visible, 2 covering angles. Old habits. Brotherhood habits. The kind of spatial awareness that never fully switched off. "She's going to a foster placement," Danny said. "I know. It might not be local." "I know, Danny." "Evelyn's going to push for a local placement. She's got a family she works with, the Ostranders. They've done emergency placements before, but it's not guaranteed." Rowan looked at his coffee. "What about the mother?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "Residential treatment. Voluntary. She's at 38 days. "How long's the program?" 90 minimum. Rowan did that math. It wasn't complicated. "So Kelsey's in the system for at least 50 more days while her mother finishes." "Minimum. Assuming she finishes. assuming she's granted reunification rights after. He put both hands around the coffee cup. It was too hot to drink, and he held it anyway. Installer. That's where it gets complicated, Danny said. Tig leaned over from the next booth. Meaning he's probably going to walk, he said, not unkindly, just factually. What Rowan witnessed isn't on video. What's on Kelsey is physical evidence of past abuse. But unless she talks, or the notebook is what Evelyn thinks it might be, Stoller's attorney is going to argue. What do you mean, what the notebook might be? Rowan said. Danny and Tig exchanged a look that was brief and specific. Evelyn got a look at 3 pages of it when Kelsey set it down at the county vehicle, Danny said carefully. She didn't say much. She said we needed to see it. She's a child, Rowan said. You can't use her notebook without… Rowan, Danny's voice was level. Evelyn knows family law in her sleep. She's not going to do anything that compromises that child or the case. But what Kelsey was drawing in that notebook, Evelyn's seen a lot of documentation. She said this is different. The truck stop hummed around them. A semi pulled into the lot outside, its air brakes exhaling. The waitress refilled Mace's coffee without asking, which was the particular grace of truck stop waitresses who recognized men in the posture of difficult conversations and knew to be invisible and present simultaneously. Different how? Rowan said. Danny picked up his coffee cup and set it down. Dates, he said. Kelsey was putting dates on her drawings. Times. She wrote descriptions underneath. Evelyn says some of those descriptions mention someone else. The booth went quiet. Who? Rowan said. That's what we don't know yet, Danny said. Evelyn's meeting with Brianna Taft in the county at 9. We'll know more after. He looked at Rowan with the flat directness of a man delivering information he'd rather not deliver. There might be more people involved than Stoller. That's what Evelyn thinks. Rowan set his coffee cup down with a deliberateness that was the alternative to putting it through the table. Underscore, 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 underscore. The Brotherhood had a clubhouse 40 minutes south of Larimer Wells, outside a town called Decker Flats that barely warranted the name, a post office, a fuel stop, a feed store operating on the edge of viability, and a converted mechanics shop that the Black Lantern Brotherhood had been leasing for 9 years. The garage bays were real and operational. 3 of the brothers did legitimate repair and restoration work that paid the lease. The back section had been converted into the kind of space that looked like nothing from the outside and was everything from the inside. Long tables, mismatched chairs, a kitchen that was operational if not elegant, walls hung with topographic maps and photographs, and the particular accumulated residue of men who'd made a home out of necessity. They rode down at 7:45, the 4 of them in loose formation on the empty morning highway, the Harleys loud and unashamed in the early light. Rowan rode in the middle and let the road do what roads did for him, which was press everything else slightly back. Not away, never away, but back enough to breathe. He hadn't processed yet what Danny had said. He was letting it sit at a distance while the highway moved under him because he knew from long experience that certain pieces of information needed time before they became something you could hold without burning your hands. Someone else in the notebook. He turned it over at 65 miles an hour, and the desert went past on both sides, and the cold morning air hit his face shield, and the Harley's engine was the only theology he'd ever found that was reliable. Underscore, 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 underscore. They pulled into the clubhouse lot at 8:20, and the garage doors were already open because Hendricks was there. Felix Hendricks, who wasn't on the ride but was always at the shop. A former Navy mechanic who'd lost 3 fingers on his right hand to a machine press in 2019 and had converted the resulting limitation into a new relationship with precision work. He was under a vintage panhead when they rolled in, visible only from the waist down. Boots and jeans, and the sound of a wrench being applied with the specific economy of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He slid out as they cut their engines. His eyes went to Rowan's face, and then away. which was the Brotherhood's version of asking how it went without requiring an answer. "Coffee's on," he said. "Hendricks," Danny said, "we might have something developing. I want you on standby." Hendricks looked at him. His three-fingered hand held the wrench loosely. "How bad?" "Don't know yet." Danny went to the kitchen. Rowan sat down on a workbench stool and took off his helmet and set it beside him and pressed his palms against his thighs. He could feel the road vibration still in his hands, the phantom engine, the way long highway miles left their echo in the body. He was 37 hours without sleep now, and it had gone past fatigue into something architectural. Not sleepiness, but a kind of structural looseness. The sensation that things he normally kept tightly ordered were beginning to shift. Mace sat down on the stool beside him, not across from him, beside him, which was a specific choice. "You doing okay?" Mace asked. "No." "Right." Mace stretched his neck. "Me neither." They sat with that for a moment in the way men in the Brotherhood sat with difficult things, not solving them, just acknowledging their weight. The way you'd acknowledge a load you were going to have to carry by first just standing beside it. "She reminded you of somebody," Mace said. It was not quite a question. "Don't," Rowan said. "I'm not going anywhere with it. I'm just saying what I see." Rowan looked at the floor. Oil-stained concrete, decades of it, the stains layered one over another until they'd become their own kind of record. "She knew exactly how to ask for help without asking for help," he said. She found the words that would get an answer without being specific enough to get her in trouble on the way back. That's not childhood. That's training. Mace was quiet for a moment. "What age were you when you learned to do that?" Rowan didn't answer. "Okay," Mace said. That was all. He didn't push it, didn't leverage it, didn't treat it as a door that needed opening. It sat between them like something that had been set down and could be picked up later or not. Mace was good at that. It was, Rowan thought, possibly his most undervalued skill, more useful than the medic training, more useful than the mechanical aptitude and the ability to stay calm in chaos. The ability to let a thing be unresolved without pretending it wasn't there. Underscore, 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 underscore. Evelyn called Danny at 9:47. Rowan watched Danny's face while he listened, which was how he'd always gathered intelligence in the Corps, less from the words than from the face of the person hearing them. Danny's face did three things in 90 seconds. It tightened, it went briefly blank, and then it reset to the particular neutral that he wore when something was bad enough to require management. He hung up. He looked at Rowan. "Kelsey talked," he said, to Evelyn. To the county caseworker with Evelyn present, Brianna Taft. Apparently once Kelsey was out of that apartment and had been, Danny paused, choosing the word, stabilized, fed. Some time, she started talking. About Stoller, and about a man named Carl Weiss. Danny set his phone down on the table. Weiss is Stoller's employer. Stoller works dispatch for a freight company that Weiss owns. According to Kelsey, Weiss has been to the apartment multiple times. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was controlling something. She described at least 3 of those visits in detail. The notebook matches her account. She dated the visits, drew them. The garage was very quiet. Hendricks, from under the panhead, had gone still. Tig was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes flat. An 11-year-old documented it, Rowan said. She did, Danny said, because she knew nobody else was going to. Rowan, she was alone in that apartment with those 2 men for 8 weeks, Danny, while her mother was in treatment, while whoever was supposed to be checking was... He stopped. He put both hands on the table and looked at them. Is there a mandatory reporter in that chain? Is there someone who is supposed to be... Evelyn's asking those questions, Danny said. Right now. Today. That's not fast enough. It's the speed of the system, Rowan. We don't... I know we don't. I know. He picked his hands up off the table. I know. He stood up and walked to the far end of the garage and stood at the open bay door looking out at the lot and the highway beyond it, and the desert that didn't care about any of this, which was its own kind of comfort. The desert's indifference was at least consistent. It didn't fail you because it had never offered anything. That was honest. Behind him, he heard Danny say something quiet to Mace. He heard Mace respond. He heard Tig's boots on the concrete, the specific sound of a man who'd decided to do something. "Rowan," Tig's voice from close behind him. He turned. Tig was holding his own phone, screen up. On it was a photograph, a screenshot from what appeared to be a public county records database, a company name, Weiss Freight and Logistics, LLC, an address in Larimer Wells, and below it, in the listing of affiliated entities, a second company name, Silverline Property Trust. "Mace found it 20 minutes ago," Tig said, "while we were waiting for the call. He started running Weiss's name because—" Tig paused. "Because that's what Mace does." Rowan looked at the screen. "What's Silverline Property Trust?" "It holds the lease on 12 residential properties in Callaway County," Tig said, "including the apartment building on Onate Street." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. This one had the texture of a shape emerging from noise, the moment when random data resolves into pattern. "Stoller's building," Rowan said. "Stoller's building," Tig confirmed. "Which means Weiss doesn't just employ the man who's been abusing Kelsey Hart. He owns the property where it's been happening. He has a financial relationship with Stoller, and he's been visiting that apartment." He took the phone back and looked at it. "That's either coincidence or it's architecture." "It's not coincidence," Rowan said. "No," Tig said. "I don't think it is either." Underscore, 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 underscore. Danny called a full meet. By 11:30, 7 Brotherhood members were in the clubhouse, the 4 who'd been in Larimer Wells plus Hendricks, and 2 others who'd come down from the chapter's northern range, Cobb, who was 51 and had the face of a retired prizefighter, which he was, and a quiet man named Soto who drove a late-model Road King and had been, in a previous life, a financial crimes investigator for the state of Nevada. Soto. That was why Danny had called him. Soto sat at the long table with Tig's phone and Mace's notes. Mace had been annotating while they talked, in the precise, cramped handwriting of a man who'd spent years filling out military medical reports in the field, and he went through it with the methodical attention of someone for whom patterns in financial entities were a native language. 10 minutes. He didn't speak during the 10 minutes. Everyone else did not speak during the 10 minutes either, which was a kind of collective patience that Rowan found himself grateful for. "Okay," Soto said. Everyone looked at him. "Weiss Freight is the primary operating entity. Silverline Property Trust is a holding structure. It owns assets, but generates no reported revenue, which means it's either losing money or it's moving money in a way that doesn't show as revenue." He tapped the phone screen. 12 residential properties in Callaway County. I'd want to look at the tenant profiles on those properties. "Why?" Cobb said. "Because if Stoller is in one of them, and Stoller has a documented history with Weiss, I'd want to know if the other tenants have similar profiles." He said it without elaboration, which was Soto's way. He presented the shape of a thing and let the room fill in the implications. The room filled them in. "You think Weiss is running Stoller as more than an employee," Danny said. "I think that's a question worth asking," Soto said. "And I think the notebook Kelsey kept might have more answers in it than anyone's had time to look for yet." Rowan had been standing at the edge of the table. He pulled a chair out and sat down, and the act of sitting was not resignation, but the opposite of it. The decision to be in this room, at this table, for however long the next part of this took. "The county has the notebook," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. She'd come in 20 minutes ago, silent entry, coffee in hand, and had been listening. "And I've already spoken to the duty supervisor. They're treating it as evidentiary documentation. The physical exam results from this morning are going to be filed with the DA's office before close of business." How long before Stoller knows the extent of it? Rowan asked. He probably already knows he's in trouble, Evelyn said. He doesn't know the scope of the notebook. If he contacts Weiss, he already has, Soto said. He held up the phone again, a second screenshot, a phone record query from a public records lookup tool. Stoller's listed number placed 2 calls to a number registered to Weiss Freight at 6:54 and 7:08 this morning, between the time the county arrived and the time you left. The room went still in a different way than it had before. That means Weiss knew about the removal order within an hour of its execution, Danny said. Yes, Soto said. And Weiss has resources, Danny said, legal, financial. He has a property trust and a freight operation, Soto said, which means he has attorneys on retainer, almost certainly, and he has enough structured distance from Stoller that if this goes the way it might go, his first move is going to be to establish that Stoller was an independent actor and Weiss had no direct knowledge of. He was in that apartment, Rowan said. Kelsey documented it. Dates, descriptions. The word of an 11-year-old and a notebook, Soto said, not dismissively, factually. Which is significant evidence, but if Weiss's attorney argues that the child was confused about who she was describing, or that the visits were routine property management. She drew them, Rowan said. I know, Soto said. The word I know had the weight of a man who understood exactly what it meant and was not minimizing it. He was mapping the terrain, not surrendering it. There was a difference. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. There's something else, she said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone delivering information they've been holding carefully. I spoke with the duty supervisor again before I came here. When they went to file the initial report, they found that a report had already been filed, 6 weeks ago. She looked at the table rather than at anyone in particular. Anonymous tip, child at the Onate Street address showing signs of distress. The report was marked as investigated and resolved. The garage held its breath. Resolved, Danny said. Resolved, Evelyn said, with a notation that a home visit was conducted and the child appeared healthy and well-adjusted, and the reporting party was likely mistaken. Who conducted the home visit? Rowan said. Evelyn looked at him. A county caseworker named Peter Dills, who has been in that position for 9 years. She paused. And who, according to public employee records that Mace found in the last 40 minutes, previously worked for a property management company. She didn't say which company. She didn't have to. The silence in the room was the loudest thing Rowan Creed had heard since the last time someone had fired at him from a direction he hadn't expected. Someone inside the system had killed the report. Someone with a connection to Weiss had looked at Kelsey Hart's situation 6 weeks ago and signed a piece of paper that said resolved and walked away. For 6 more weeks she had been alone in that apartment with Raymond Stoller and the visits of Carl Weiss, while the county's file said she was fine. Rowan stood up. The chair scraped back. Where's Kelsey right now? He said. Brianna Taft has her, Evelyn said. They're at the county intake facility in Harmon, pending placement. Brianna Taft doesn't know about Dills yet. No. Does Dills know that Kelsey's been removed? Does he have access to the county intake system? Evelyn's face did something that was the closest she came to alarm. She picked up her phone. Danny was already on his feet. He looked at Rowan across the table with the eyes of a man who'd just watched a situation change shape, who'd arrived in the morning thinking they were dealing with a domestic abuse removal, and now understood they were inside something with dimensions they hadn't finished measuring. Rowan, he said. Rowan was already getting his helmet. Rowan, Danny's voice sharpened. We do this right. We don't go in. I'm not going in anywhere, Rowan said. He stopped at the garage door, turned. His face in that moment was the controlled face he'd worn on the worst days in the Corps. The face that wasn't empty but was managed. Every emotion present and accounted for, none of them in charge. I'm going to be within visual range of wherever Kelsey Hart is until we know every person in that county system who has a connection to Carl Weiss. That's all I'm doing. Danny looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Mace. Ride with him, he said. Mace was already off his stool. Rowan pulled on his helmet and walked out of the garage into the mid-morning desert light, and the Harley started with the sound of an argument being made in a language that didn't require words, and he pulled out of the lot onto the highway heading north, and Mace's engine was behind him before he'd cleared the fence line. The road opened up. The desert ran out on both sides with its merciless clarity. He pushed the speed up past what was comfortable and felt the resistance of air against his chest, and thought about an 11-year-old girl with a notebook full of dated drawings, sitting in a county intake facility in Harmon, not knowing that the system that was supposed to protect her had a man inside it who'd already looked at her once and looked away. He thought about 6 weeks. He thought about everything that had happened in 6 weeks while a piece of paper said resolved. The Harley's engine was the only sound, and it was not enough to drown out what he was thinking. And he didn't try to make it enough because some things needed to be heard in the body before they could be acted on correctly. And this was one of them. And the road ahead was long, and the desert didn't offer forgiveness, but it did offer clarity. And right now, clarity was the only thing he trusted. His phone buzzed against his chest. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He pulled to the shoulder at 80 miles an hour and stopped. Evelyn's number. He answered. Peter Dills signed into the county intake system at 11:49 this morning, Evelyn said. Her voice was completely flat. He accessed Kelsey Hart's file. Her current placement address is in that file. Rowan did not say anything for 3 seconds. She's not at that address yet, Evelyn continued. Brianna Taft is still in transit. I've reached Brianna. She's pulling over and waiting for instruction, but Rowan, send me Brianna's location, he said. Rowan, we need to call Evelyn. Send me the location, right now. A pause that lasted the length of a decision being made by a 67-year-old woman who had spent 40 years believing in the architecture of law and had arrived at this specific moment at the limit of what that architecture could do in the time available. The pin dropped on his phone. He looked at it. He looked at the road. Behind him, Mace had pulled up and sat on his idling Harley with his visor up, watching Rowan's face, reading the situation the way he'd learned to read situations in places where reading them wrong had consequences that couldn't be undone. How far? Mace said. 22 minutes, Rowan said. Mace lowered his visor. They went. They found Brianna Taft's county vehicle pulled onto the gravel shoulder of Route 9 southbound, hazard lights blinking orange in the flat mid-morning glare, 3 miles outside Harmon. Rowan saw it from a quarter-mile out and felt something in his chest unlock that he hadn't known was locked, the specific relief of arrival before the thing you were afraid of arriving before. He pulled up behind the county car and cut the engine and was off the bike before the kickstand fully engaged. Mace came in behind him, wide, covering the road angle without being asked. Brianna Taft was standing outside the driver's door. She'd positioned herself between the car and the highway, which put her body between the road and the back seat, where Kelsey was visible through the window. Small, upright, backpack on her lap, notebook against her chest, watching everything with those measuring eyes. Brianna looked at Rowan. She looked at Mace. She looked at the road behind them. Evelyn said someone accessed her file, she said. Her voice was doing the thing voices do when the speaker is frightened and has decided that functional was more important than acknowledged. She said it was someone inside the county system. Peter Dills, Rowan said. He pulled her placement address 11 minutes ago. Brianna's face went through several things rapidly. The last one it arrived at was the particular expression of someone whose understanding of their professional environment had just been revised downward in a significant way. I know Peter, she said. He's been in this office since before I started. I know, Rowan said. He wasn't dismissing it. He understood exactly what it cost to hear that a colleague was not what they appeared to be. He'd learned that cost in the military, where the revision was sometimes lethal. Right now, the question is where you take her that isn't in that file. Brianna looked at the back seat. Kelsey was watching them through the glass, not moving. I can't just... Brianna started. There's a protocol for placement. I have to... Evelyn Cross is your supervisor's colleague, Mace said quietly, from his position near the rear of the vehicle. She's on the phone with the duty director right now. She's going to have an alternative placement authorization inside 20 minutes. What we need from you is 20 minutes. Brianna looked at Mace. She looked at Rowan. She was 26 years old and 14 months into a job that had not prepared her for this, and Rowan could see her making the calculation, the one between procedure and instinct, between the comfort of protocol and the evidence of her own eyes. She looked at the back seat again. Then she got back into the car without another word. Underscore, 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 underscore. Evelyn called at 11 minutes. The alternative placement authorization came through to Brianna's county tablet at 13. The Ostrander family, the emergency placement household Evelyn had referenced, was 28 minutes from the current location, in a direction that did not pass through Harmon or require accessing any system that Peter Dills could monitor. Rowan followed the county car the entire way. He rode 30 feet behind the bumper, which was close enough to be visible in Brianna's rearview mirror as a constant, which was the point. Mace rode behind him. The three-vehicle convoy moved through high desert scrub and the occasional small-town grid without incident, and Rowan watched the back of Brianna's head through the rear window and watched the side roads, and watched his mirrors, and kept his hands loose on the grips, and did not let himself think further ahead than the next quarter mile. The Ostrander property was outside a town called Meseta, a working horse ranch that had been operating for 30 years and had taken emergency placements for 12 of them. A woman named Ruth Ostrander came out to the gravel drive when they pulled in. Mid-50s, sun-darkened, wearing work gloves she was pulling off as she walked, the kind of woman whose competence was expressed through movement rather than announcement. She looked at the county car, and then at the two bikers, and then at the county car again. She went to the passenger side and opened the back door herself. "You must be Kelsey," Ruth said. Her voice had the register of someone who'd done this before and knew that the first 30 seconds set the temperature for everything that followed. "I'm Ruth. You want to see the horses first or you want to eat something?" A pause from inside the car. "Horses," Kelsey said. Ruth nodded like this was the correct answer. "Come on then." Rowan watched Kelsey climb out of the county car. She still had the backpack on both shoulders and the notebook tucked under her arm. She looked at the horses in the far paddock, 3 of them moving along the fence line in the late morning heat, and something in her face did a thing he hadn't seen it do before. Relaxed was the wrong word. Paused, like a machine that had been running in defensive mode for so long that a single second of absence of threat was enough to register. She followed Ruth toward the paddock without looking back. Rowan exhaled. Underscore, 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 underscore. He and Mace stayed at the ranch for 90 minutes while Evelyn coordinated the placement paperwork and Brianna Taft filed an amended incident report with the duty director that specifically named Peter Dills and the anomalous system access. Brianna was shaking slightly when she filed it. Rowan saw it in her hands while she typed. The particular tremor of someone doing something they knew was professionally irreversible and doing it anyway. "You're doing the right thing," Rowan said. "I know," she said without looking up. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," he said. "It doesn't." He left her to finish it and walked to the fence line, not the paddock where Ruth and Kelsey were standing with the horses, but the far fence, the one that faced the open desert, where there was nothing to look at but distance, and the particular clarity that distance offered. Mace appeared beside him after a while, and they stood there without talking, and the morning moved toward noon, and the temperature climbed, and the desert didn't care. "Danny called while you were inside," Mace said eventually. "What did he say?" "Soto's been running Weiss for 2 hours. He found something." Mace paused. "He found several things." Rowan turned to look at him. Mace's face was doing the thing it did when information was bad enough that the telling of it required a moment of preparation, not for the speaker's sake, but for the listeners. "We need to go back to the clubhouse," Mace said. "Soto needs to show you himself." He said that specifically. He said he needed to show it rather than describe it. In 15 years of knowing men who chose their words carefully, Rowan had learned that "I need to show you" was the sentence that preceded the things that changed the shape of everything that came after. "Kelsey's safe here," he said. Ruth Ostranders had 12 years of placements and never had a security incident. Nobody outside this car, this ranch, Evelyn, and the duty director knows the address. Peter Dill's system access has been flagged and his credentials suspended pending investigation. Mace said it in sequence, thoroughly, the way a medic runs through a patient's vitals before moving them, establishing baseline, confirming stability. She's as safe as we can make her right now. Rowan looked toward the paddock. He could see Kelsey's green sleeve through the fence boards, her arm extended, one of the horses taking something from her palm. Ruth standing back, giving her the space to do it without commentary. "Okay," he said. Underscore, 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 underscore. They rode back to Decker Flats into the beginning of weather. The high desert's relationship with afternoon storms was absolute and unconditional. They appeared from the southwest with the decisiveness of something that had never considered being otherwise. And by the time Rowan and Mace were 20 minutes from the clubhouse, the sky had gone the greenish gray that preceded genuine rain, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees, and the Harley's engine note changed character slightly in the thickening air. The rain started at the clubhouse edge of town. Not gradual, the high desert didn't do gradual, but immediate, full weight, the kind that turned gravel lots into shallow rivers inside 4 minutes. They pulled into the garage bays with the rain hammering the metal roof, and Rowan pulled off his helmet and shook the water off his cut and stood for a moment listening to the sound of rain on steel, which was a sound he had specific memories attached to, none of them gentle. The full Brotherhood was in the main room. 8 men. The long table had Soto's laptop open at one end, various printed pages spread across the middle, Mace's handwritten notes updated and expanding into a second sheet. Cobb was standing against the back wall with a coffee mug, and an expression that said he'd already heard what Rowan was about to hear and had not yet finished deciding what to do with it. Danny was at the head of the table. He looked at Rowan when he came in, and the look confirmed what Mace's face had already indicated. Rowan sat down. "Show me," he said to Soto. Soto turned the laptop. On the screen was a corporate filing from the state registry, Silverline Property Trust, the entity that owned the Onat Street building, with its 12 residential properties in Callaway County. Beside it was a second filing, a second property trust, similar structure, registered in a neighboring county 4 years earlier. "2 entities," Soto said. "Same architecture, slightly different names. The second one is Silvergate Holdings, registered in Morrow County." He pulled up a map on a second window. 17 properties in Morrow County. The 2 trusts together hold 29 residential properties across 2 counties. "Stoller-type tenants in the Morrow County properties," Rowan said. "We don't have tenant data yet, but the registered agent for both trusts is the same individual." Soto pointed to a name on the screen. A man named Douglas Hain. He's an attorney, specializes in property and corporate structuring. "He's Weiss's attorney," Danny said. "Yes, and one other client that we've found so far." Soto pulled up a third document. It was a business registration, a different kind, a nonprofit filing. The name was Callaway Family Services Foundation. "This is a private charitable organization that has been operating in Callaway County for 11 years. It provides supplemental funding to county social services. Specifically, it funds approximately 30% of the Child Protective Services Department's non-personnel budget, office supplies, vehicles, training programs, software licenses." The rain on the roof was very loud. Rowan looked at the nonprofit's filing. Board of Directors, 3 names, Douglas Hain. A woman named Patricia Weiss, which was Carl Weiss's wife, and a third name that he read twice before it resolved into meaning. Peter Dills. Peter Dills was on the board of a charitable foundation that partially funded the department where he worked, which was registered by the attorney who structured the property trust that Carl Weiss controlled. The shape of it arrived all at once, the way shapes in the dark arrived when your eyes had been adjusting long enough, not gradually, but suddenly, the whole thing visible at once. "He's not just an employee who looked the other way," Rowan said. "No," Soto said. "He's been inside the structure. He's part of the structure. For at least 4 years. based on the Foundation's filing dates, possibly longer. Soto leaned back. The Foundation's funding relationship with CPS means Dills has had a legitimate reason to be involved in departmental decisions. Budget allocation, software procurement, which means he has had, for 4 years, legitimate access to case management systems, placement databases, and reporting workflows. Rowan understood what he was being told. He's been managing which cases get resolved. "We think so," Soto said. "We can't prove it yet." But the anonymous tip that was filed 6 weeks ago about Kelsey, the one that was marked resolved after a home visit, there were 17 other similar cases filed in Callaway County in the past 4 years that were similarly resolved within 48 hours of filing, all by the same caseworker. Dills, 3 times. 2 other workers, whose names I'm running now. 17 cases. Rowan's hands were flat on the table. He became aware of them as objects that were doing something independently of his intentions, pressing into the wood with a steady force that he didn't consciously apply. He made himself ease them. "There are other children," he said. "Possibly," Soto said. "We don't know the nature of every one of those 17 cases. But yes." The word possibly was doing its best, but it wasn't strong enough to hold what it was being asked to contain. Hendricks, from his position near the tool wall, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Cobb's coffee mug touched the back wall with a dull thud. Danny had not moved or spoken in 4 minutes, and his stillness had the quality of something structural, a load-bearing kind of quiet. Tig spoke first. "What does Weiss actually do with these properties?" "That's what we don't know yet," Soto said. 29 residential properties across 2 counties structured through 2 separate trusts managed by a single attorney, with a county social services employee on the board of the associated foundation. The properties could be generating legitimate rental income, and the rest of it could be a separate arrangement between Weiss and Stoller that's more limited in scope than the structure implies. He paused. "But the structure implies more." "What does it imply?" Tig said. Soto was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, he chose each word with the deliberateness of someone who understood that articulating a theory aloud was different from holding it privately, that saying it made it real in a way that required action. "It implies a system," he said, "for identifying vulnerable households, for managing the official response to those households, for controlling who intervenes and when and what the record shows afterward." The rain hammered the roof. Rowan looked at Danny. Danny was looking at the table. His jaw was set. His hands were folded in front of him, and in 11 years, Rowan had seen Danny Crow fold his hands in front of him approximately 4 times, and each time it had meant that he was containing something that required containing before he could allow it to exist in the room. "If this is what we think it is," Danny said, and his voice was very quiet, very precise, "we are not dealing with one man who abused one child. We are dealing with an organization, and an organization has people who protect it." He looked up from the table. "Which means Kelsey's notebook isn't just evidence of what happened to her," he said. "It's evidence of the system she was inside, and the people who run that system know she's been removed. They know she talked to the county. They've had 3 hours to understand what exposure they're facing." The room understood what he was saying. Rowan understood it in his body before he understood it consciously. The specific cold of a threat assessment shifting from manageable to something that required different math. "They'll move to discredit her," Rowan said. "Or more," Danny said. The word more was very small and very large simultaneously. "She's a child," Rowan said. His voice came out flat, which was what happened when the thing he was feeling was too large for the voice to carry at full volume. "She's 11 years old." "I know," Danny said. "She documented everything because nobody else was going to. She did it herself, Danny. An 11-year-old kept her own record because the adults whose job it was—" "I know, Rowan." Quieter, firmer. The voice of a man who felt the same thing and knew that feeling it loudly right now was not the response the situation required. Rowan pressed his palms against his thighs under the table. He looked at the laptop screen, at the corporate filings, at the neatly structured legal architecture of something that had been operating in plain sight, protected by the paperwork of legitimacy for years. His jaw ached from what his teeth were doing, and he made himself stop. "Who do we tell?" Mace said. "State level? Federal?" "Evelyn's already been on the phone with the state AG's office," Danny said. "She started making calls the moment Dill's name came up. But state investigations move at state speed, and in the meantime, Dills knows Kelsey's been removed, and he has a financial relationship with the man her abuser works for," Rowan said. "Yes. And Peter Dills still has his phone." Danny looked at him. "He suspended his county credentials," Rowan said. "That doesn't mean he can't call Weiss directly. That doesn't mean Weiss doesn't already know everything Dills pulled from that system before his access was flagged." The room was very quiet. Then, Soto said from behind his laptop, "I need you all to look at something else. Underscore, 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 underscore." Soto had been running a second search while the room processed the first layer of information. This was how he worked, Rowan had learned in 4 years, in parallel rather than sequence, one thread running while another was being discussed. He turned the laptop again. A news archive page. Local paper for Morrow County, the county north of Callaway, where the Second Property Trust operated. The date on the article was 2 years old. The headline read, "Teen disappears after being removed from foster placement." "Her name was Alicia Dombrowski," Soto said, 15 years old. "She was removed from a foster home in Morrow County under an emergency order, placed temporarily with a county-approved family. She disappeared 48 hours after the placement." The room looked at him. "She was never found," Soto said. Tig straightened up from the wall. "The foster home she was removed from," Soto said. "It was at a property on Kestrel Lane in Morrow County." He pointed to the map, "which is listed as an asset of Silvergate Holdings." Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds. Rowan heard his own breathing. He heard the rain. He heard the sound of a Harley engine cooling somewhere in the garage, the tick-tick-tick of metal contracting. He heard Cobb set his coffee mug down on the back wall shelf with the careful deliberateness of a man who needed to do something with his hands. "There's a second article," Soto said. He scrolled down. Another archive page. Different paper, same county, 14 months ago. County official steps down amid case management questions. "A caseworker in Morrow County resigned after questions were raised about 17 cases that had been marked resolved without adequate documentation. The county opened an internal investigation." He paused. "The investigation concluded that the caseworker had been undertrained and the department had implemented new oversight protocols." "Let me guess," Tig said. "The investigation was led by the county's oversight liaison," Soto said. "A man named Reed Callaway. No relation to the county, just the same name, who served in that role for 3 years before moving to a position in the State Social Services Commission." He looked at the room, "where he currently oversees compliance reviews for both Callaway and Morrow County's Child Protective Services departments." The architecture had architecture. It went up and it went sideways, and somewhere in it a 15-year-old girl had disappeared 48 hours after being removed from a property that belonged to the same trust structure as the building where Kelsey Hart had spent 8 weeks alone with Raymond Stoller. Rowan stood up. The chair went back hard. "Evelyn," he said, "does she know this yet?" "I'm sending it now," Soto said. He was already typing. "Does the state AG know about Alicia Dombrowski?" "Unknown. The case is technically still open at the county level in Morrow. But if Reed Callaway is the compliance overseer for both counties, then any state inquiry goes through a man who potentially has a reason to manage its scope," Danny said. "Yes." Rowan walked to the garage bay door. The rain was heavy enough now that the lot was a sheet of moving water. The Harleys standing in it with the stoic indifference of machines, chrome going dull in the gray light. He pressed one hand flat against the doorframe and looked out at the rain and tried to find the shape of what he was inside. It was larger than he'd thought. That was the constant revelation of it. Every layer removed exposed another layer, and the new layer was always worse than the one before, which meant that the thing at the center, when they reached it, was going to be something that required a response larger than any one man or one chapter or one night's careful patience with a court order and a retired attorney. He thought about Kelsey at the paddock fence, her arm extended, the horse taking something from her palm. He thought about Alicia Dombrowski, 15 years old, who had disappeared from a county placement and never been found, and whose disappearance had been investigated by the same mechanism that was designed to prevent such things. He turned back from the door. "I need to know if Kelsey is the only current case," he said. "Soto, the 17 cases that Dills resolved, do any of them have children who are currently in placements, currently in county custody?" Soto was already typing. "Give me 10 minutes. Danny." Rowan looked at the chapter president. "We need to call every contact we have in Morrow County, every person we know who knows people. I need eyes on those 17 properties in Silvergate Holdings." "I can make those calls," Danny said. "Cobb." Cobb straightened from the wall. "You still have the contact in the state police?" "Donnelly." "Yeah. Not the county. Not anyone whose jurisdiction runs through Reed Calloway's office. State police directly." "Understood." "I need someone to go back to Kelsey," Rowan said. "Not to question her, not to push on the notebook, just to be there. Ruth Ostrander needs to know that we're treating this as a higher-level security situation than we represented when we dropped Kelsey off." Mace raised his hand. It was not a dramatic gesture, just a man indicating he was the one. "I'll go. Take Tig." Tig was already putting his cut on. The room was moving, the particular quality of movement that had a unified direction to it. 8 men orienting toward a common purpose with the trained efficiency of people who had been through things together and had learned that the time between decision and action was where situations deteriorated. They didn't rush, they were precise. Tools coming off walls, phones coming out, the long table going from a display of information to an operational surface. Rowan went back to his position at the garage door. He was thinking about something Soto had said, something that had gone past him in the velocity of the larger revelation, but was now circling back with the persistence of a detail that refused to be ambient. He turned it over. The foundation. Calloway Family Services Foundation. Its nonprofit filing listed 3 board members. Hain, Patricia Weiss, Dills. 3 board members on a foundation that had been operating for 11 years. But Soto had said the second property trust, Silvergate Holdings in Morrow County, was registered 4 years ago, which meant the foundation predated the Morrow County operation by 7 years, which meant it had been operating in Calloway County alone for 7 years before it expanded. He walked back to Soto's laptop. Soto looked up at him. "The foundation," Rowan said. "Show me its early filings. Year 1. Soto pulled them up. The original filing, 11 years old. Board of directors, 3 original members. Hain was 1. A founding member listed as a co-director, now deceased according to a later amendment, and the 3rd. Rowan looked at the name. He read it twice. He read it a 3rd time, and it remained what it was. The 3rd founding board member of Calloway Family Services Foundation, 11 years ago, was Dana Hart, Kelsey's mother. He straightened up from the laptop, and the room moved around him in a way that was not physical. Nothing moved. The rain still hammered the roof. Soto was still at his laptop. Hendricks was still at the tool wall. But the configuration of everything rearranged itself the way it did when a fundamental piece of the picture revealed itself to have been facing the wrong direction the entire time. Dana Hart had not stumbled into Carl Weiss's orbit through her boyfriend Raymond Stoller. She had not been a peripheral victim of a system that Weiss controlled from a safe distance. She had been, at some point, inside the structure, a founding member of its organizational face. And 8 weeks ago, she had checked herself into voluntary residential treatment for substance dependency, leaving Kelsey alone with the man who worked for the man whose structure she had helped build. Rowan did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was very quiet. "Soto, what year did Dana Hart leave the foundation board?" Soto scrolled. "Found it. Amendment filed 6 years ago. She's listed as having resigned. Reason given as personal circumstances. 6 years ago. Which was, if Kelsey was 11 now, approximately the time Kelsey would have been 5. She left when Kelsey was old enough to understand things," Rowan said. Half to himself. half to the room. She left, and then she built a life that Stoller was part of and Weiss could reach. And now she's in treatment, and Kelsey's been alone in that apartment. He looked at the ceiling, at the rain noise above it. Whether she left because she found out what the structure was actually being used for, or whether she left for another reason, and Weiss used Stoller to keep a leash on her afterward. We don't know. We need to talk to Dana Hart, Danny said from across the room. She's in a residential program, Rowan said. 48 days in. I know. We go to her. We disrupt her program. She's 48 days sober. If Weiss knows Kelsey is out of his orbit and has a notebook full of dated documentation, Dana Hart may already be in danger, Rowan. Program or no program. The words arrived in his chest with the weight of things that were true and also terrible, which was a specific kind of weight that he had extensive experience carrying but had not become easier to lift. Get Evelyn, he said. She needs to be the one to approach the treatment facility, not us. If we show up at a residential program in leather cuts... Agreed, Danny said. He was already dialing. Rowan went back to the door. The rain was not letting up. The desert in the afternoon storm was a different landscape than the desert in the morning heat. Lower, closer. The visibility contracted to the fence line and the Harleys and the water moving in the gravel. His phone buzzed. Mace. At the ranch. Kelsey's okay. Ruth knows to keep the gate locked. We're here. He typed back, stay until I tell you different. He pocketed the phone and looked at the rain and thought about an 11-year-old who had documented her own abuse because the adults who should have protected her were part of the system that was enabling it, and whose mother had once been inside that system and had gotten out, or tried to, and had ended up in a treatment facility while her daughter was left in the care of the man who connected her to the man she'd walked away from. He thought about the notebook, about the fact that Kelsey had kept a dated, annotated record of everything. For how long? How long had she been doing that? Had Dana Hart taught her? Had Kelsey figured it out alone? Had some part of her child's survival intelligence understood, without being able to articulate it, that she was inside a system that required documentation to escape? And then another thought arrived, the kind that came from the place in his mind where things were processed below the threshold of intention. If Dana Hart had been a founding board member of the foundation, if she had been inside the structure, if she had left and Weiss had kept a connection to her through Stoller, if Kelsey had witnessed the visits, Stoller, Weiss, and who else, and had been documenting them, had Dana Hart known what Kelsey was documenting? Had she gone into treatment knowing? Had she gone into treatment because she knew, and because she understood that the only way to protect Kelsey was to remove herself and wait for the documentation to surface through a channel she couldn't control, because any channel she controlled was a channel Weiss could also control? He didn't know. He couldn't know yet. But the question changed the shape of Dana Hart in his mind, and changed it in a direction that was more complicated and more frightening, and in a way that he couldn't entirely explain, more human than the version he'd been carrying since Danny had told him she was in treatment and left Kelsey behind. Danny, he said. On the phone, Danny said from across the room. When Evelyn goes to the treatment facility, tell her to ask Dana Hart one question first. He turned from the door. Ask her if she knows what's in the notebook. Danny relayed it into the phone. The room continued to move around its center. The rain continued. The Harleys in the lot stood their patient chrome vigil in the water. Rowan's hands were loose at his sides for the first time in several hours, not because the situation was less dangerous, but because danger had resolved into clarity. And clarity, in his experience, was always preferable to the specific blindness of not yet understanding what you were inside. He understood now. Not everything, not the dimensions of it, but the shape. It was large. It had layers. It had operated for years inside the systems designed to stop it, protected by the people employed to notice it. It had, somewhere in its recent history, produced a missing 15-year-old girl whose case had been managed into administrative resolution. And at its current exposed edge was an 11-year-old at a horse ranch outside Meseta, holding a spiral-bound notebook against her chest with the careful grip of someone who knew, without knowing how she knew, that what was inside it was the most important thing she owned. Soto's laptop chimed. He looked at it. He looked at Rowan. The 17 cases that Dills resolved, Soto said. He stopped. What? Rowan said. Soto turned the laptop. On the screen was a list. Names, ages, dates of the original reports, and the dates of resolution. He'd been working on pulling current status for each case, which children were still in county custody, which had been returned to families, which had aged out of the system. 3 of the names on the list had a red notation beside them in Soto's system. The notation read, "Current whereabouts unknown. 3 children, resolved cases, unknown whereabouts." One of them was Alicia Dombrowski, 15, whose case Soto had already surfaced. The other 2 were an 8-year-old boy named Marcus Webb, whose case had been resolved 2 years ago, and a 12-year-old girl named Sophie Reyes, whose case had been resolved 14 months ago. 3 children, not 1. Rowan looked at the names on the screen and felt something happen in his chest that was beyond the vocabulary he'd developed for the management of difficult emotions. Something that went past controlled rage and past cold clarity and into a place that didn't have a name he'd been trained to use and only had the name he'd been taught to distrust. He looked at Danny, who had ended his call and was looking at the laptop, and whose face had gone the color of something that had been drained of everything but the essential. "We need federal," Rowan said. "Yes," Danny said, "not state, not county, federal, FBI, Child Crimes Unit." "Yes. Tonight, not tomorrow. Evelyn needs to make that call tonight." "She already is," Danny said quietly. "She started that call before she went to the treatment facility." He looked at Rowan with the eyes of a man who had been in the Brotherhood for 22 years, who had seen things that warranted the kind of patience that most people confused with indifference, and who was now in a situation that had finally reached the threshold even his particular patience was not designed to contain. She started it the moment she heard Alicia Dombrowski's name. Outside, the rain hit the roof with the sound of something that would not stop until it had said what it came to say, and Rowan Creed stood in the middle of the Brotherhood's garage and understood for the first time the true dimensions of what a child's notebook had pulled into the light, and understood what it meant that the light was now on it, and understood what men with resources and structured distance and a system built to manage their exposure were going to do in the next few hours once they understood it too. His phone rang. Mace. He answered before the second ring. "Rowan." Mace's voice had a quality he'd only heard from Mace 3 times in 4 years, and each time it had meant that something had changed in the terrain of a situation. "There's a truck. It's been at the end of Ruth's Road for 20 minutes. Rowan was already moving toward his Harley. "It hasn't moved," Mace said, "but Tig ran the plate." "And," Rowan said, "it's registered to Weiss Freight and Logistics," Mace said. He was on the Harley before Mace finished the sentence. The rain had not let up. If anything, it had thickened in the last hour, the kind of desert storm that arrived fast and left slow, and the gravel lot of the clubhouse was 2 inches of moving water when Rowan came through it at speed, the rear tire throwing a rooster tail of brown water as he hit the road. Danny was behind him 30 seconds later, then Cobb, then Soto, who had not ridden in 2 years due to a knee injury but had gotten on his bike without being asked and without comment. 4 Harleys in the rain heading north on a county road that was turning the color of old clay. Rowan had the phone propped in his jacket pocket with Mace still on the line, the earpiece keeping the connection. "Talk to me," he said into the wind. "Truck hasn't moved," Mace said. "1 occupant visible. Driver's seat. He's not doing anything, just sitting." "Just sitting is surveillance," Rowan said. "Yeah." "Ruth, no." "I told her. She's got the kids inside. Her husband is with them. I didn't know the husband was here, but he is. Name's Gerald. He's a big man, and he's got a shotgun from somewhere that I'm pretending I didn't see." "Good. Where's Kelsey?" "Kitchen. Ruth gave her something to do. Bread dough, I think, keeping her hands busy and her back to the window." Rowan thought about Kelsey's hands pressing into bread dough in a stranger's kitchen while a Weiss freight truck sat at the end of the road, and the cold in his chest was absolute and clarifying. "What's Tig doing?" Tig is behind the horse barn at the property line, which puts him about 40 feet from the truck. He has a sight line on the driver and the truck bed. Is the truck bed occupied? A pause. He can't confirm. The rain is cutting visibility. Tell him to stay where he is. We're 22 minutes out. Copy. He pushed the Harley harder. The road was straight here. High desert straightaway with the visibility dropping as the rain thickened, and the Harley's headlight cut a white cone into the gray that showed him road and rain and nothing else. Behind him, he could feel more than hear the other three engines. The specific way multiple Harleys in close formation created a collective frequency that you perceived in the chest rather than the ear. His hands on the grips were completely steady, which was the thing that happened when the situation was real enough. The shaking was for the moments before. When the moment arrived, the shaking stopped. 14 minutes out, his phone buzzed with a second call. Evelyn. He switched over. Tell me. I'm at the treatment facility, Evelyn said. Her voice was precise, stripped of everything except information. I've spoken with Dana Hart. Does she know about the notebook? A pause that lasted 3 seconds and contained more information than most sentences. She knows about the notebook, Evelyn said. She's the one who told Kelsey to keep it. The road went under him at 65 miles an hour, and the rain hit his visor in sheets. Say that again, he said. Dana Hart told Kelsey to document everything. She gave her the notebook. She gave her the stickers for the cover. She told her to write the dates and describe what she saw and keep it hidden. Evelyn's voice did not waver. She said she'd been trying to build a case against Weiss from inside for 3 years, and she hadn't been able to do it because every channel she tried to use was a channel he controlled. She said the only way out was a record that came from outside the structure, from someone Weiss wouldn't think to manage. An 11-year-old, Rowan said. Her daughter, Evelyn said. He rode in the rain and let that sit in him. The specific weight of a mother who had understood that the only witness Weiss couldn't reach or discredit or disappear was her own child, and had made a decision so terrible and so precise that it could only have come from someone who had been inside the thing long enough to understand its architecture completely. She went into treatment deliberately, he said. It was not a question. She went into treatment because she has a genuine dependency, but she chose this facility in this county at this time because being in a locked voluntary program created a documented, verifiable reason for her absence from the apartment that Weiss's structure couldn't interpret as a threat. Evelyn paused. She expected the removal to happen faster. She expected someone to find Kelsey within 2 or 3 weeks. She didn't know about Dills. 8 weeks. Dana Hart had left her daughter in that apartment expecting someone to come in 2 or 3 weeks, and the system's internal saboteur had extended it to 8. She's been sitting in there for 48 days knowing what Kelsey was in, Rowan said. Yes, Evelyn said. He didn't say anything else about it. He couldn't. Not at 65 miles an hour in the rain with a Weiss freight truck sitting at the end of a road where his brothers were watching over a child. There would be time later for what he felt about it. Right now, he needed what was useful. Does she know about the missing children? Alicia Dombrowski, Marcus Webb, Sophie Reyes? A longer pause. She knows about Alicia, Evelyn said quietly. That's why she started trying to build the case 3 years ago. She says she doesn't know what happened to Alicia. She says she doesn't know if Weiss was directly involved or if it was... Evelyn stopped, chose words. She says she doesn't know if Alicia ran or if she was made to disappear, but she believes that the way the investigation was managed afterward was deliberate. Does she know Reed Calloway? Personally, Evelyn said. He was at the Foundation's annual event 4 years ago. She says he and Weiss spoke privately for approximately 20 minutes. The shape of it continued to expand outward. Rowan had stopped being surprised by the expansion. He was simply mapping it. Evelyn, the FBI call. Agent Sasha Reeves, Financial Crimes and Human Exploitation Unit, Field Office in the state capital. She received my initial brief 2 hours ago. She's been briefed on the Alicia Dombrowski connection. She's moving. A pause. But Rowan, federal investigations have their own timelines. Tonight, she cannot... I know what she can't do tonight, Rowan said. What I need to know is whether anyone in Weiss's network has a reason to know we're talking to the FBI. Not through me, Evelyn said. Agent Reeves is using a secure channel, and she's aware of the Callaway connection at the state level. She's going around that. Okay. He checked his position. 8 minutes out. Evelyn, where is Weiss right now? Physical location? I don't know, Evelyn said. I've been at this facility for the last 90 minutes. Soto would have more current. I'll call him. Stay with Dana Hart. Don't let her call anyone. Not yet. She understands that. Does she? A pause. She's been waiting 3 years to have someone believe her, Rowan. She's not going to jeopardize it now. He ended the call and switched back to Mace. Status. Truck's still there, Mace said. But there's a second vehicle now. Pickup. No plates I can read from here. Second vehicle, Rowan said. Came in from the North Road, stopped behind the Weiss truck. I've got 2 occupants. Where's Tig? Still at the barn line. He's seen the second vehicle. He texted me. He's staying put. Rowan clicked over to a group channel and said, Danny, do you hear this? Heard it, Danny said, engine noise behind his voice. 2 vehicles, 1 confirmed Weiss. 5 minutes. We come in from the south, Rowan said. Standard approach. No theater. We don't make this a confrontation on the road if we can help it. Agreed, Danny said. But if those vehicles move toward the property, then we make it a confrontation on the road, Danny said. Underscore, 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 underscore. They came off the Kimoni blacktop onto the ranch's gravel access road at 6 minutes past Rowan's last check. The rain was still heavy, but the light was different here. The storm had diffused the afternoon into a premature dusk. The world compressed to the range of headlights, and the smell of wet scrub and horse, and the particular cold that arrived when desert rain held long enough to mean it. The Weiss freight truck was visible from 400 meters. White box truck, medium commercial, sitting on the gravel shoulder where the access road met the county road. Behind it, the pickup, a dark blue 3/4-ton, newer model, no plates, sat with its engine running, exhaust curling up in the rain. 4 Harleys came off the county road and stopped in a line across the access road entrance, engines idling. Rowan looked at the truck. The truck sat. He had been in standoffs before. He knew their grammar. The first minute was information gathering on both sides, each party assessing the other's composition and intent, and determining whether the situation would resolve through departure or escalation. The grammar of the standoff was different from others he'd been in because the other party had already revealed intent by being here. This wasn't a chance encounter that could be read as coincidental. They were at the end of a road where a child was eating bread dough in a kitchen, and they'd gotten here by accessing a county system through a man on their payroll. Intent was not ambiguous. The truck's driver door opened. The man who got out was not Raymond Stoller. He was older, heavier, wearing a rain jacket that bore no logo or affiliation, moving with the specific unhurried quality of someone who had decided before getting out of the vehicle that the outcome of this interaction was already determined. He walked to the front of the truck and stopped. He looked at the 4 Harleys. He pulled out a phone and raised it, and appeared to make a call. Rowan cut his engine and got off the bike and walked forward. Behind him, he heard Danny say quietly, "Rowan." A warning, not a command. He kept walking. He stopped 10 feet from the man. The rain came down between them. The man was on the phone and did not appear to be in a hurry to end the call. His eyes were on Rowan, and they had the particular quality of eyes that had calculated that the man in front of them was not a legal problem. Rowan waited. The man ended the call. He put the phone in his jacket pocket with the deliberateness of someone making a point out of an ordinary gesture. "Private road," he said. His voice was flat, regional, the accent of the high desert that absorbed people and gave them back wearing a certain sameness. "You're not on the private road," Rowan said. "You're on the county shoulder." "Then I'm not trespassing." "No," Rowan said. "You're not." They looked at each other in the rain. "That your property back there?" the man said. "No." "You affiliated with the property?" "I'm affiliated with the people on it." The man looked past Rowan at the 4 Harleys. The engines behind Rowan were still running. The idling sound of 4 Harleys in the rain was a specific frequency that had a specific effect on people who understood what it represented. The man looked at them and looked back at Rowan. "You boys should probably ride on," he said. "Weather like this." "We're comfortable," Rowan said. A pause. The rain in the scrub around them was the only sound. "My employer owns property in this area," the man said. "He likes to do routine checks of his assets." "The Ostrander property isn't a Weiss Freight asset," Rowan said. Something moved in the man's eyes. Small. The recalculation that happened when a person understood their information had been matched and exceeded. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man said. "Yeah, you do," Rowan said. Another pause. The man's hand had not moved since he pocketed the phone, but Rowan was watching it with the peripheral attention that the core had built into him, the monitoring that happened below conscious decision. It was still. "Whatever you think you know," the man said, "I'd think hard about how well you want to know it." "I'd think hard about being on this road," Rowan said, "in this rain, in a Weiss freight truck, or with a county official's access logs showing your employer's interest in the location of a minor child." The man was still for a moment. Then he looked past Rowan again at the Harleys and did a calculation that Rowan could see him doing. 4 bikers on the road. Unknown number at the property, a retired attorney who had called the state AG and the FBI in the past 4 hours. The math of exposure versus position. He was doing it. He did it for 10 seconds. Then he got back in the truck. The pickup behind it did not move immediately. Rowan stood in the rain and looked at the pickup's windshield and could see 2 silhouettes through the water-streaked glass, and he looked at them until the pickup's reverse lights came on and it backed away. The truck followed it. Rowan watched both vehicles until they were out of visual range on the county road, heading south toward Larimer Wells. Then he turned and walked back to his bike. His legs were entirely steady. His hands were entirely steady. He got on the Harley and sat for a moment with the engine idling under him. Danny pulled up beside him. "They'll be back," Danny said. "Not tonight," Rowan said. "Tonight they're going to regroup. Weiss is going to make calls. He's going to assess what they know and what they have and what the exposure window is." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow depends on what we do tonight." Danny looked at him. The rain was easing slightly, the first indication that the storm had said what it came to say and was considering departure. "What do we do tonight?" Danny said. "We get Evelyn on the phone with Agent Reeves," Rowan said. "We get Soto to send everything he has directly to the FBI field office. We keep Kelsey at the Ostrander property with Mace and Tig on the gate." He looked at the road where the truck had been. "And we find Carl Weiss. Underscore, 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 underscore." Weiss was not at the Weiss freight office. Soto confirmed that by driving past it, a single-story commercial building on the eastern edge of Larimer Wells, locked, lights off, parking lot empty except for 2 company vehicles. He was not at the residential address listed in county records. A house in a subdivision north of town that showed dark windows and no movement when Cobb drove slowly past. He was, according to a contact of Danny's, who worked at a fuel and supply operation near the county line and had eyes on most of the vehicle traffic in the area, at a building 30 miles south of Larimer Wells that was not in any record Soto had found under Weiss's name. A concrete block structure on a private parcel registered under yet another LLC, sitting back from the road behind a windbreak of salt cedar and a rusted gate that was standing open. Danny's contact described 3 vehicles in the lot. One was a car registered to Douglas Hayne. The attorney was there, which meant Weiss was managing legal strategy in real time, which meant he understood the exposure was serious, which meant he was either preparing to lawyer up and create distance, or he was doing something else, something that required a physical location not connected to him by paper. "What's in the building?" Rowan said. They were assembled in the clubhouse again, 8 men, Mace and Tig on the phone from the Ostrander property, the storm tapering outside to a drip and run off the eaves. "My contact doesn't know," Danny said. "He's never been inside. It's been on that parcel for 20 years, changes hands through LLCs every few years. He said Weiss started using it about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when Dana Hart had started trying to build a case. He moved his operation to an unregistered location when someone inside started asking questions, Rowan said. That's one reading, Soto said. What's another reading? Soto was quiet for a moment. That it was always there. That the registered locations are the surface, and this is what's underneath. The room absorbed that. Rowan looked at Cobb. Your contact at State Police, Donnelly, is he someone who can move on a location without running it through the county chain? Cobb's face did the thing it did when he was running a careful internal assessment. He can move on a location if he has cause. What we have is a business address associated with a vehicle registered to an attorney. That's not cause. We have Soto's documentation, Rowan said. The financial structure, the foundation filings, the Dills connection. That's not enough for a building, Cobb said. Not in one night, not without the federal involvement. He paused. Donnelly can put eyes on the location without a warrant. Surveillance is not entry. Call him, Danny said. Eyes on the location, nothing more. We need to know how many people are in that building, and we need to know if it's just attorneys or if it's operational. Cobb stepped away with his phone. Rowan stood up and walked to the kitchen and filled a glass of water from the tap and drank it standing at the sink. The window above the sink showed the lot and the highway and the diminishing rain, the kind of view that was useful only for confirming that the world outside was still there and had not been replaced by something worse while he wasn't looking. He'd been awake for 34 hours. The number was abstract. It attached itself to specific things. The grit behind his eyes, the way sounds had acquired a slight delay between occurrence and processing, the particular taste at the back of his throat that was fatigue expressing itself chemically. He was past the threshold where rest was a preference and into the territory where it was a performance variable. He would function, but the margin for error had contracted. He needed to know that about himself. He set the glass down and went back to the table. Soto's phone had been ringing in bursts for the last 20 minutes, messages coming in from the data searches he'd set running. He was processing them with the focused silence of someone who had learned to treat information as terrain, not reacting to each piece, but reading the landscape they collectively formed. Soto, Rowan said. Soto looked up. Something in his expression said the landscape had changed. Marcus Webb, Soto said. The 8-year-old whose case Dills resolved 2 years ago. His grandmother filed a missing persons report with Morrow County 11 months ago. He turned his laptop. Morrow County MPD forwarded it to the County Social Services Liaison for investigation. He looked at the room. Reed Calloway's office. The room heard it and was quiet. The report is still marked as open, Soto said, pending investigation, in Calloway's office for 11 months. Rowan looked at the ceiling. He looked at the rain-wet window. He looked at the long table and the men around it, and the particular exhaustion that had settled into the room, not as weakness, but as the specific gravity of people who had been inside something long enough to understand its true weight. 3 children, he said, not missing, being kept missing, by the same mechanism. Nobody argued with it. His phone buzzed. Mace from the Ostrander property. He answered. We've got something, Mace said. His voice had the careful quality of someone reporting rather than reacting, the medic's discipline of accuracy over emotion. Kelsey asked Ruth if she could show us something in the notebook. She's been waiting. She didn't want to show it to the county worker. She wanted to wait. A pause. Rowan, she's been holding something back. There's a section at the back of the notebook, separate from the dated entries. What kind of section? Rowan said. Names, Mace said. She has a list of names, people she heard Weiss and Stoller talking about over a period of months. Not descriptions. Full names, because she looked them up afterward on her mother's laptop when they were out. She knew how to search public records because her mother showed her. Another pause, longer. Rowan, one of the names on the list is Reed Calloway. He closed his eyes for 1 second. She heard Weiss use his name, he said, in conversation with a third person. Not Stoller, someone else who came to the apartment twice. She has a physical description: male, late 50s, gray hair, drives a black SUV with a partial plate, she wrote down. Send me the description and the partial plate, Rowan said. Right now. He put the phone on speaker and held it towards Soto, who had his laptop open and his hands on the keys before the sentence was finished. The description came through. The partial plate. Soto ran it. The room waited in the particular suspended quality of people who had learned that waiting for Soto produced results faster than rushing him. 90 seconds. 3 vehicles in the state registry match the partial plate and description in the relevant counties, Soto said. One is a fleet vehicle registered to a state agency. He looked at his screen. It's assigned to the office of the State Social Services Compliance Division. Reed Calloway's office, Danny said. Reed Calloway personally, Soto said. It's a vehicle assigned to his position. The thing that had been building all day, through the morning vigil and the county removal and the drive to the ranch and the truck on the road and the building in the salt cedar, arrived at a point of convergence that Rowan felt in his body before his mind had finished processing it. The compliance overseer for both counties' child protective services had been in that apartment. He had been in Weiss's presence in the same location where Kelsey had documented the abuse and the visits and the names. He had a vehicle that matched the description. He had spent 11 months sitting on a missing child report in his own office. Rowan looked at Danny. Danny looked back. Between them passed the specific communication of men who had been through enough together that certain understandings required no language, the recognition that what they were inside was no longer a single case of abuse that the Brotherhood had intercepted through the specific grace of a child asking a stranger the right question at a gas station. It was a network with reach into state-level systems, protected by a man with authority over the very investigations that could expose it, that had produced at minimum 3 children whose whereabouts were unknown, and who had operated for years behind the face of a charitable foundation. And at the center of it, in a concrete block building behind a salt cedar windbreak 30 miles south, Carl Weiss and his attorney were deciding right now what to do about the fact that a notebook existed, and that the notebook was in the hands of county workers and a retired attorney who had the FBI on the phone. Cobb came back into the room. He had his phone in his hand and a look on his face that Rowan had not seen before in 4 years of knowing him. Not alarm, because Cobb did not do alarm, but the close relative of it that lived in the face of a man who had heard something that required immediate reorientation. Donnelly put a unit on the building, Cobb said. Plain clothes. Parked on the county road with a visual. He paused. There are 6 vehicles in the lot, including 2 that his unit identified as belonging to individuals with active, not expired, active, state law enforcement credentials. The air in the room changed. Law enforcement, Danny said. 2 of them, Cobb said. His unit ran the plates. Both are current serving officers. 1 county level, 1 state. He looked at the room with the eyes of a man who had been a prize fighter and had learned to read the moment when a situation changed weight class. Donnelly says his unit is standing by. He says he cannot authorize entry without cause. He says if we have something that creates cause, we have a child's documented testimony and a partial plate matching a state vehicle assigned to a man whose name is in that testimony, Rowan said. That's enough for a warrant application, Soto said. Not tonight. Tomorrow morning. What happens tonight? Rowan said. The room was very quiet. Tonight, Danny said, they make decisions that will be much harder to make tomorrow when there's a warrant in process. He was looking at the table. His jaw was set. If there's documentation in that building, physical records, if there's anything that connects those 3 missing children to that location, we can't go in, Rowan said. No, Danny said. We cannot go in. The agreement was absolute, and the cost of it was visible in every face in the room. They had spent 34 hours doing everything correctly. The court order, the professional caseworker, the retired attorney, the FBI contact, the state police liaison, the documented financial structure. Every step taken in the space between what they wanted to do and what needed to be done for the result to hold. They were not going to breach a building with serving law enforcement inside and destroy everything they had built with one decision made in the compressed space of righteous fury. They were not going to do that. Donnelly's unit stays on the building, Danny said. Nobody goes in, and nobody comes out without being identified and logged. We get Evelyn on the phone with Reeves right now, and we push for emergency federal authorization. Tonight, not tomorrow morning. The warrant application takes, Soto started. Not a warrant, Danny said. A federal hold. Reeves can flag the location as a site of interest in an active federal investigation. That doesn't let her go in, but it creates a record that any movement of materials from that building tonight becomes evidence of obstruction. Soto was already typing. I'll get Evelyn the specific language. Rowan had not sat back down. He was standing at the edge of the table with his hands at his sides, and the controlled fury that had been the constant temperature of the last 14 hours was now at a level that had a structural quality. It was load-bearing again, the way it had been when he was 17 and alone, and had first learned that rage could be a form of architecture rather than collapse. He was using it. He was building with it. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Is this the man who was at the Onate Street building this morning? A woman's voice. Flat. Not a question. A verification. Who is this? Rowan said. My name is Sophie Reyes, the voice said. I'm 14 years old. I've been at an address in Morrow County for the past 7 months. I got a phone from a man who brought food last week, and I've been waiting to use it until I had a number to call, and I got this number from... She stopped. The stop had the quality of someone managing something with enormous effort. I got it from a man named Marcus. He said if I could get to a phone, I should call this number. The room had gone entirely still. Soto had stopped typing. Danny had stopped moving. Every man at the table was looking at Rowan's face. Sophie, Rowan said. His voice was the quietest it had been all day. Are you safe right now? Right this moment? There are 2 men here, she said. They don't know I have the phone. I have maybe 10 minutes before they check. I need an address, Rowan said, or a road, or anything you can see from a window. There's a sign on the road outside, she said. I can see it from the bathroom window. It says Kestrel Lane. Kestrel Lane. Soto had said it 40 minutes ago, the address in Morrow County where Alicia Dombrowski had been placed before she disappeared. Sophie, I need you to listen very carefully, Rowan said. I'm listening, she said. In 60 seconds, I'm going to hang up. I need you to keep this phone hidden and stay exactly where you are. Do not go near the men. Do not let them know you have the phone. In the next 20 minutes, there are going to be people coming to that address. Official people. Do you understand? A pause. Are you going to come? She said. It was a child's question. Unguarded, direct, the specific vulnerability of someone who had been held for 7 months and had reached a phone and called a number and wanted to know if the person on the other end was real. Yes, Rowan said. He hung up and looked at Danny. Danny was already on his feet. Donnelly, Rowan said to Cobb, right now. Kestrel Lane in Morrow County. Active situation. Tell him we have a confirmed minor in distress at that location, and we have reason to believe additional minors may be present. Tell him that is the cause he needs. Cobb had his phone out before the sentence ended. Soto was on his laptop calling up the Kestrel Lane property. It's a Silvergate Holdings address, he said, as expected. The parcel is listed as a... He stopped. He looked at the screen. It's listed as a licensed foster care property. Licensed by the county through the system that Peter Dills and Reed Calloway had been managing. How many people can that property legally house? Danny said. Soto read the screen. Licensed for up to 6 minor residents, he said. 6. 3 names they knew. 3 children missing or unaccounted for. A licensed property that could hold 6. And a 14-year-old girl on the phone who said Marcus had given her the number, which meant Marcus Webb. The 8-year-old whose grandmother's report had been sitting in Reed Calloway's office for 11 months was at that location, or had been. Rowan put on his helmet. Rowan, Danny's voice sharp. I told her I was coming, Rowan said. Law enforcement needs to be first through that door, Danny said. You know this. Law enforcement can be first through the door, Rowan said. I'll be at the end of the road. I'll be the last face she sees when she comes out. He looked at Danny across the garage, across the long table and the rain-damp air, and the 11 years between them, and the sum of every decision they'd made together in the spaces where doing the right thing was more expensive than doing the fast thing. I told her yes, Danny. Danny looked at him for 3 seconds, then he picked up his own helmet. We ride behind Cobb, Danny said to the room. We hold at the county road until Donnelly's unit clears the building. Nobody crosses the property line without the all clear. This is not negotiable. No one argued. They went. 8 Harleys came out of the Decker Flats clubhouse into the tail end of the Desert Storm and hit the highway heading north with the particular sound that 8 American V-twins make in unison. A frequency that was less sound than presence, less noise than statement. The announcement of men who had decided that the space between who they were and who they were needed to be was not tonight as wide as the world had always assumed. The rain was ending. The sky to the west had broken open in one strip of late amber, a single band of light at the horizon under the clearing storm, and the wet highway reflected it back in pieces. The road ahead of them lit in fragments of gold and black. Rowan rode point. His hands were steady on the grips. His engine was the loudest thing in his chest. 30 miles. The road opened up. The amber light at the horizon held as long as it could, and then the night closed over it, and they rode in the dark toward a building on Kestrel Lane where a 14-year-old girl was hiding a phone and waiting for the word yes to mean something. And behind them the desert settled into the specific silence that came after rain, when the land had received what it needed and was still. And the only sound was the sound of 8 engines carrying 8 men toward the reckoning that had been building since 11:47 in the morning, when an 11-year-old girl at a gas station asked a stranger where the police that helped kids was. And the stranger had looked at her long-sleeve shirt in August and recognized something he had never been able to name, but had been carrying since he was small and had not ridden away. Cobb's phone lit up on the handlebar mount. Donnelly. Cobb answered and rode and listened, and after 45 seconds he raised his fist, the signal old and simple, and the 8 bikes accelerated together into the dark. Donnelly's unit went in at 9:44. Rowan held at the county road with the 7 other Harleys idling behind him, engines low, the kind of sound that was more vibration than noise in the chest cavity. The Kestrel Lane property was visible from their position. A square concrete building set back 200 meters behind the salt cedar windbreak, its windows lit yellow. 2 vehicles in the gravel lot that the state police unit had parked around with the practiced geometry of people who had done this before. A second unit had come in from the north road. 4 officers total. Danny had made Cobb confirm it twice. 4 officers. Donnelly personally leading, federal hold from Agent Reeves already on record, cause established through Sophie's call, and the property's connection to the active federal investigation. It was enough. It had to be enough. Rowan sat on his Harley and watched the lit windows and did not move. The minutes were the worst kind. Not the minutes before a decision, which had their own terrible momentum, but the minutes after, when the decision had been made and the action was in other hands, and all that remained was the waiting that was not passive but felt like it, the waiting that required more discipline than any of the moments that had preceded it. 3 minutes. A light went off in the building, then on again. Then voices, not words, just the texture of raised voices reaching across 200 meters of wet scrub. Then a door opening. Rowan's hands tightened on the grips. A figure came out, small, moving fast, not running, but the walk of someone who had been told to move and was moving with everything they had. One of Donnelly's officers was beside the figure, hand not quite touching the shoulder, the specific proximity of someone providing a margin rather than guidance. Behind them, through the open door, more voices, the different quality of voices that had encountered authority and were deciding how to respond. The figure cleared the salt cedar. Rowan cut his engine and got off the bike. The girl was tall for 14, or had been once. There was a stretched quality to her frame that suggested someone who should have been taller but had been compressed by something. The particular posture of sustained fear over months making her carry herself smaller than her bones. She had dark hair and an oversized sweatshirt and bare feet on the wet gravel, and she was walking toward the county road with her eyes moving across the line of parked Harleys and the 8 men in leather cuts with the calculation of someone who had spent 7 months updating their assessment of what was safe and was doing it again right now. She stopped when she saw Rowan. He was standing at the county road edge, 6 feet from his bike. He had taken his helmet off. He looked like what he was, a 41-year-old former Marine who had been awake for 36 hours and rode a Harley and wore a cut with a bent flame lantern on the back and had the particular face of a man who had been broken and repaired and was neither fully one nor the other. "Sophie," he said. She looked at him. Her jaw shifted. "You said yes," she said. "I said yes," he confirmed. She looked at the line of Harleys, at Danny, who had gotten off his bike and was standing with his arms at his sides in the particular stance of a large man trying to take up less space, at Cobb, who had the prizefighter's face and had turned it away slightly, which was his version of softness, at Soto, who had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the ground. She looked back at Rowan. "There are others inside," she said. "Marcus is inside. She stopped. Her voice had been doing the medic's trick, the flat reporting voice that kept emotional content at a distance, and it stopped working for a moment, and she pressed her lips together until it worked again. "He's 8 years old," she said. "He's been there longer than me." "I know," Rowan said. "They're getting him right now." Donnelly's second officer came out of the building carrying a boy, not carrying him because he couldn't walk, carrying him because the officer had seen something in the first 30 seconds and had made a decision. The boy's head was on the officer's shoulder, and his eyes were open, and he was looking at the sky, the first sky he'd seen in a while by the quality of his looking, the way someone looks at something they had begun to doubt existed. Sophie made a sound that was not a word and put both hands over her mouth. Rowan looked at the boy and looked away. Behind him, he heard Mace, who had arrived from the Ostrander property while they were holding at the county road. He heard Mace breathe in once, controlled, the breath of a medic recalibrating. Then Mace walked past Rowan toward the officer with the boy, and the officer looked at Mace's Brotherhood cut and looked at Donnelly, who had come out of the building and gave a single nod. And Mace took the boy with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and the gentleness of someone for whom it cost something. Marcus Webb looked at Mace's face. He didn't say anything. He put his head back on the shoulder that was offered and closed his eyes. Rowan turned back to Sophie. She was watching Mace and Marcus, and the particular quality of her watching was the thing that unmade him. Not grief, not relief, but the specific suspended expression of someone who has been waiting so long for a thing that its arrival doesn't feel real yet, who's watching it happen and waiting for the part where it stops being true. "Come on," Rowan said. He didn't touch her. He stepped to the side to indicate direction. "There's a car. Warm. You can sit." She looked at him one more time. Then she walked. Underscore, 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 underscore. 3 adults were in custody before midnight. 2 men taken from the Kestrel Lane property. Not Weiss, not Calloway, but men who had been present and whose connection to the structure Soto had already begun mapping by the time Donnelly's unit had them in restraints. The third was Peter Dills, taken from his home address in Harmon at 10:15 by a state police unit that Donnelly had coordinated while the Kestrel Lane entry was in progress. Dills had opened his front door in a bathrobe and looked at the officers and said, in a voice that was barely anything at all, "I knew this was coming." Then he had held out his wrists. Carl Weiss was not at the Kestrel Lane property. He was not at the concrete block building behind the Salt Cedar windbreak, which Donnelly's 3rd unit had secured simultaneously as a federal hold site pending Agent Reeves's warrant. He was not at his home or his office or any of the registered addresses connected to his entities. He was, as it was determined at 2:17 in the morning, at the regional airport 40 miles east of Larimer Wells, boarding a small charter aircraft. He did not board it. Federal agents from Reeves's field office, who had been moving since Evelyn's call and had been informed of Weiss's vehicle at 6 different points over the last 8 hours, were waiting at the departure gate. Weiss's attorney, Douglas Hayne, was with him. Both were taken into federal custody at 2:22. Rowan heard about it from Evelyn, who called from the county hospital where Sophie and Marcus had been taken for medical evaluation. Her voice on the phone had the tone of a woman who had spent 40 years fighting a system that mostly lost and was, at this particular moment, not losing. "Weiss is in federal custody," she said. "Hain is cooperating. Reeves says his cooperation is substantial." "Reed Calloway," Rowan said. "Reeves's office is coordinating with the state attorney general. Calloway was taken from his home at 1:45. He's not cooperating. They don't need him to." A pause. Soto's documentation was the framework. Kelsey's notebook was the evidence inside the framework. Sophie's testimony and the children found at Kestrel Lane are the weight that closes it. "How many children were at that location?" Rowan said. He had not asked directly until now. He had been managing the question at arm's length, letting other things be more immediate because some information needed the right moment, or it became something you couldn't carry without dropping other things. Evelyn was quiet for 2 seconds. "4," she said. "Sophie, Marcus, a 16-year-old girl named Dina Torres whose family has been looking for her for 5 months, and a 10-year-old boy who is not yet given a name. He's responsive but not verbal. He's being evaluated." Her voice remained precise. She was doing the same thing Rowan was doing, managing through function. None of them are in life-threatening condition. All of them are going to require significant time and support. "Alicia Dombrowski," Rowan said. A longer pause. "Not at that location," Evelyn said. "Reeves's team is continuing to investigate. The cooperation from Hain may produce information about Alicia's whereabouts." She stopped. "I don't know yet, Rowan. I have to be honest with you. I don't know." He was standing in the parking lot of the county hospital, and the night was cold in the way the desert was cold after rain. Absolute, clear, the temperature having dropped the way it dropped when the sky was no longer doing anything to hold the warmth in. He stood in it and let it be cold and thought about a girl who had disappeared 3 years ago, and about the specific difference between not knowing and knowing the worst, and why the distance between those two states was sometimes bearable and sometimes not. "Okay," he said. "Rowan." Evelyn's voice shifted slightly, a degree or two toward something human underneath the precision. "You did this correctly, every step. What happened tonight was built on every decision you made from that gas station forward." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Go get some sleep," Evelyn said. "I'll call you in the morning." He pocketed the phone and stood in the parking lot and looked up at the sky, which was fully clear now, the storm entirely gone, the stars over the high desert doing what they always did when the atmosphere cleared, appearing in numbers that seemed excessive, the sky overcrowded with light in a way that felt almost argumentative. He looked at them for a while. Then he went back inside. Underscore, 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 underscore. The hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning had the specific quality of all hospital waiting rooms at 3 in the morning. The particular amber white of fluorescent lighting at low setting, the smell of industrial cleaner and bad coffee, and the accumulated anxiety of everyone who had ever sat in those chairs. The television mounted in the corner playing a cable news channel on mute, the captions scrolling text about events that seemed to be happening in a different universe than this one. Mace was in the corner with a paper cup of coffee. His forearms were on his knees and he was looking at the floor in the way a man looks at a floor when he's seeing something else. The scarring on his arms caught the fluorescent light in a particular way that Rowan had noticed before and never mentioned. Rowan sat down beside him. They didn't speak for a while. This was not unusual. It was, in fact, one of the primary functions of the Brotherhood that people outside it rarely understood. The ability to be present without requiring the presence to mean anything in particular. To sit beside someone in a bad room at a bad hour, without demanding that the sitting become a conversation. "Marcus asked me my name," Mace said eventually, still looking at the floor. "What did you tell him?" "Mace." He turned the paper cup in his hands. "He said that was a weird name. I said it was a nickname. He asked what my real name was, and I told him Felix, and he said he liked that better." A pause. He's been calling me Felix for the last 2 hours. Rowan looked at the floor beside Mace's boots. Nobody's called me Felix since my mother, Mace said. He said it without weight, as a fact, the way facts were delivered when the weight had already been paid, and what remained was the clean shape of the thing itself. Rowan received it the same way. She okay? Mace asked. Kelsey. At the ranch, Rowan said. Sleeping. Ruth said she ate half a loaf of bread she made herself and went out somewhere around 9. He looked at his hands. She asked Ruth if the man with the Harley was coming back. Ruth told her probably yes. Mace nodded once. Mace, Rowan said. Yeah. I'm going to need... He stopped. He started again. I don't know how to do the next part. Mace looked at him for the first time since he'd sat down. The fluorescent light was not kind to faces, and it was not unkind to Mace's, which was the face of a man who had spent 20 years being honest about damage. What next part? Mace said. Kelsey's mother gets out of treatment in 42 days. The reunification process is going to be a long time before Kelsey goes home. If she goes home. If Dana Hart is what Evelyn thinks she might be, a woman who did a terrible thing for complicated reasons and has been trying to correct it, that's a different case than a woman who simply wasn't there. He looked at the television. The caption scrolled. In the meantime, Kelsey is 11 years old and she's at a horse ranch because we found her a place to be for the next 48 hours. Evelyn's working on extended placement with the Ostranders, Mace said. I know. Ruth Ostrander would keep her. She told me so directly. She said, and I'm quoting, that the girl was good with horses and good in the kitchen and had more sense than most adults she knew. He paused. She also said the Brotherhood was welcome at her kitchen table on weekends, which I think is the Ostrander version of an official endorsement. Rowan made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same space where a laugh would have been if the last 36 hours had been different. The next part, Mace said, is the same as every other next part. You show up, you're there. You don't make it complicated. He looked back at the floor. That's all it ever is, Rowan. For people like her and people like us, you don't overcomplicate it. You just show up. Rowan looked at him. Mace was looking at the floor and turning his paper cup, and somewhere down the hall, Marcus Webb, who was 8 years old and had been calling him Felix for 2 hours, was being evaluated by a pediatric nurse, and Mace was sitting in a waiting room chair at 3 in the morning like a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. Okay, Rowan said. Underscore, 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 underscore. The diner outside Larimer Wells opened at 5:30, and the Brotherhood was in its parking lot at 5:15. 8 Harleys and a retired attorney's Ford, and the particular patience of people who had gotten through a night and were waiting on the other side of it for something ordinary. The owner, a man named Bertie who had been opening the same diner at 5:30 for 23 years, came out to unlock the door and looked at the parking lot and went back inside and came back with a handwritten sign that he taped in the window. The sign said closed for private party, even though it was 5:15 in the morning, and private parties were not something the diner did. He held the door open. They filed in. 8 bikers and Evelyn Cross, who had driven directly from the county hospital, and Brianna Taft, who had been at the hospital until midnight, and had come to the diner because Evelyn had told her to, and because she was 26 years old and 14 months into a job that had just revealed its darkest room, and she needed to sit with people who had also seen it and had stayed upright. Bertie poured coffee without being asked. He brought out eggs and toast in quantities that suggested he understood the nature of the occasion without having been told, the specific intuition of a man who had fed people at 5:30 in the morning for 23 years and understood the grammar of different kinds of nights. The table was long and the coffee was hot, and nobody tried to make the conversation into something it wasn't. There was some talk, quiet, practical, the debrief that happened naturally when people came out the other side of something together. Soto went through the federal case timeline, what Agent Reeves had communicated. Cobb updated on Donnelly's end. Evelyn talked about the medical status of the 4 children from Kestrel Lane without naming their full names, a privacy reflex after 40 years. Then the conversation became other things. Hendricks told a story about a motorcycle he'd been trying to restore for 3 years that kept defeating him in new and specific ways. Cobb, unprompted, mentioned that he'd been learning to make tamales and that the process was more complicated than he'd anticipated, which produced a 15-minute conversation about whether lard was essential or negotiable. Brianna Taft, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table with both hands around her coffee cup, laughed at something Danny said, and then looked briefly startled by herself, the surprise of a laugh arriving without being scheduled. Rowan sat in the middle of it and drank his coffee and let the morning happen. The light outside changed from dark to the particular early gray that preceded actual dawn, and the diner's windows showed the parking lot and the Harleys in it, and beyond them the highway going both directions into nothing. He watched the light change and felt, in his chest, the specific easing of something that had been held at maximum tension for 36 hours. Not release. Release was too complete, too final for what this was. More like the way a fist opened one finger at a time, each finger a separate decision, the palm not fully open but less closed than it had been. He thought about Kelsey at the Ostrander Ranch, sleeping in the first safe room she'd been in for longer than he could calculate. He thought about her hands in bread dough. He thought about her arm extended over a paddock fence, a horse taking something from her palm. He thought about the notebook, the dated entries and the names and the descriptions in a child's handwriting that had been the architecture of a case that grown adults with legal authority and institutional resources had failed to build. He thought about Dana Hart sitting in a treatment facility for 48 days, 42 days remaining, knowing what her daughter was holding, waiting for the thread she'd sent into the world to pull something loose. He thought about the thing he'd said to Mace in the waiting room. "I don't know how to do the next part." He knew it was a lie when he said it, not a dishonest lie. The kind of lie that a person told because the truth was too large to say directly and needed the indirect approach. What he actually didn't know how to do was to want the next part without managing the wanting from a distance. Without the specific buffer zone he'd maintained between himself and every person he'd been adjacent to since he'd come home from the Corps, and found that adjacent was the only distance he could tolerate. Mace had said, "You show up. You're there. You don't make it complicated." He understood that this was not wisdom in the general sense. It was instruction in the specific sense, delivered by a man who knew the particular geography of Rowan Creed's interior landscape and had identified the one road through it that would hold weight. He picked up his coffee cup, and it was nearly empty, and Bertie, passing with the pot, refilled it without breaking stride. Underscore, 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 underscore. 2 weeks after the night at Kestrel Lane, Rowan drove to the Ostrander Ranch on a Tuesday morning when the August heat had finally broken enough to suggest that the year remembered there were other seasons. He brought nothing. He'd thought about bringing something. There was a long and uncomfortable internal debate about whether showing up with something was the right gesture or whether it was the kind of gesture that required interpretation and put the burden of interpretation on an 11-year-old who already had enough to carry. He showed up with nothing, and this turned out to be correct. Ruth met him at the gate, which she had adopted as her consistent practice over the previous 2 weeks. Not to manage access, but because she was a woman who came to gates when people arrived, a hospitality so automatic it had become structural. "She's in the barn," Ruth said. He walked to the barn. Kelsey was brushing down the gray mare, a 14-year-old horse named Accounting Error, which was a name that had a story behind it that Ruth had told Rowan during the first week, and that he'd found, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, deeply comforting. Kelsey had the brush working in long, even strokes, not the strokes of someone who'd been shown how to do it, but of someone who'd found the rhythm themselves and was inhabiting it. She heard him come in and didn't stop brushing. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. He leaned against the stall door. Accounting Error turned one large eye toward him and then returned her attention to Kelsey, which seemed like an endorsement. "Ruth said you've been helping with the early feed," Rowan said. 5:30, Kelsey said. "I like it better than sleeping." He understood that. "Yeah," he said. She brushed in silence for a moment. The barn in the morning had its own smell. Hay and horse and the residual cool of the night that the building held longer than the open air did. Outside, he could hear the other horses moving in the paddock. "They arrested more people," Kelsey said. It wasn't a question. "3 more last week," he said. "The case is still going." "My mom's case," she said. The brush continued its rhythm. "Your mom's not in legal trouble," Rowan said carefully. "Evelyn's working with the federal investigators to make sure they understand what she did and why. She's a witness, not a defendant." Kelsey's hand slowed briefly on the brush, then resumed. "She knew what she was doing when she gave me the notebook," she said. "Yes." "She knew it might take a long time." "Yes." Another silence. The mare shifted her weight. Kelsey moved with her automatically. The adjustment of someone who'd learned the body language of large animals quickly and had found it, probably, more honest than the body language of people. "Is she going to come here when she gets out?" Kelsey asked. "Or am I going back there?" "That's going to be up to you," Rowan said. "You and Evelyn and Ruth and some other people who are paid to help figure it out. But the most important vote is yours." She stopped brushing. She stood with her hand on the mare's flank and looked at the wall of the barn, which had nothing on it except old wood and the particular golden brown of aged pine in morning light. "I don't know what I want yet," she said. "That's okay," Rowan said. "You don't have to know yet." She turned and looked at him. It was the same look she'd given him at the gas station, measuring, assessing, doing the calculation of what was safe to show. He let her look without doing anything about it. "Are you going to stay around?" she asked. He had not prepared an answer to this question because he had known it was coming and had also known that the prepared version would be worse than the real version. The real version arrived without his permission, the way real things did. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the mare and resumed brushing. "Okay," she said. It was the same word, the same one she'd used at the gas station when he'd crouched down and asked if someone was hurting her, and she'd decided not to answer and said okay and turned to leave. The same one she'd used when he'd told her he'd followed her. The same word she had, he was beginning to understand, been using her entire life as the door that swung both ways, closing when she couldn't go further, opening when she decided to let something through. This time, it swung open. He stayed in the barn for another hour and did not talk much and did not feel that he needed to. Underscore, 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 underscore. The federal case moved with the particular velocity of federal cases that had sufficient evidence and cooperating witnesses, which was to say, it moved faster than most things involving institutions and slower than anyone who had watched 4 children come out of a building at night would have preferred. Douglas Haynes' cooperation was substantial, as Evelyn had said. It opened 3 additional properties across 2 counties and produced documentation that connected Weiss's operation to a network that had been running in some form for 11 years, which was as long as the Foundation had been operational, which was as long as any of them had been willing to follow the thread backward. Reed Calloway did not cooperate. His attorney argued procedural grounds on every front. The procedural grounds did not hold, ultimately, because Soto's financial documentation and Sophie Reyes's testimony and the physical evidence from Kestrel Lane were not the kind of evidence that procedural arguments dissolved. His trial was set for 8 months from the date of arrest. Weiss's trial was set for 6. The outcomes of both trials were, in the estimation of Agent Reeves, not uncertain. Peter Dills pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentencing and full cooperation. He gave 11 names to the federal investigators over 6 sessions with Reeves's team. Of those 11 names, 7 resulted in additional arrests. The case became, in the language of federal filings, a RICO investigation, which Evelyn explained to Rowan one morning at the diner outside Larimer Wells as meaning that what had looked like a network of individuals was recognized, legally and structurally, as what it had actually been, an organization. Alicia Dombrowski was found. Not in the way anyone hoped. Not alive, not free, not at the end of a road that had a better ending than the one it had. She was found through Haynes' cooperation, and information he provided about a specific property transaction from 3 years ago, the details of which Rowan read once in a summary that Evelyn gave him and did not read again. The information was complete, and it was terrible, and it was the thing that finalized the weight of the case in a way that no conviction would make lighter. She was found, and her family was notified, and her family, which consisted of a grandmother and a younger brother, received the information in a county official's office with a trauma counselor present. And the grandmother, who had filed the missing persons report that Reed Calloway had left open for 11 months, held her grandson and said something that was not recorded but was described by the counselor afterward as the most composed grief she had witnessed in 20 years of the work. Rowan went to the diner by himself the night after Evelyn told him, and sat in the corner booth and drank 3 cups of coffee and didn't eat anything and looked out the window at the highway until Bertie sat down across from him at 10:30 with a piece of pie and put it on the table and said, "You don't have to eat it, it's just company." He didn't eat it. He sat with the company. Underscore, 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 underscore. Dana Hart completed her residential treatment program on a Saturday morning in October, when the desert had finally conceded to autumn and the air had the particular clean edge of a season change in high altitude. Evelyn was there when she came out. Rowan was not, which was a decision Evelyn had made and communicated clearly, and which Rowan had agreed with without being happy about it. The first days after treatment were for the person in treatment and the people they had a documented relationship with. The Brotherhood was not that. The Brotherhood's role in Dana Hart's immediate future was to be what it had always been, a presence at the perimeter, which was not the same as absence. The reunification process between Dana and Kelsey was not fast and was not smooth, and was not the kind of thing that arrived at resolution through a single conversation or a single day. Evelyn managed the formal process. The Ostrander Ranch remained Kelsey's home during it, and Ruth Ostrander managed the informal process with the specific competence of a woman who had been doing this for 12 years and understood that healing was not linear and did not announce its own arrivals. There was a day in November. Rowan heard about it from Ruth, not from Kelsey, because Kelsey had not told him and he had not asked. When Dana Hart came to the ranch for the first time and sat at the kitchen table with Kelsey across from her, and they talked for 3 hours while Ruth and Gerald moved around the edges of the house, doing things that needed doing and giving the table its necessary privacy. Ruth said she didn't know what was said. She said when Dana left, she sat in her car in the driveway for a while before she drove away. She said Kelsey came into the kitchen afterward and asked if she could help with dinner. She made the bread again. Ruth said it was the best batch yet. Underscore, 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 underscore. On a Saturday in late November, Rowan pulled into the Ostrander Ranch at 9 in the morning and found the Brotherhood already there. Not all of them. Danny and Mace and Tig, plus Hendricks, who had driven rather than ridden because his knee had been bad in the cold. Their bikes were in the gravel drive, and Gerald Ostrander was talking to Danny about something involving a fence post and the kind of particular lateral force that fence posts in high desert soil were subjected to. And Danny was listening with the careful attention of a man who had not grown up around fence posts and was finding the subject genuinely interesting. Ruth was in the kitchen. Kelsey was in the kitchen. Sophie Reyes, who was staying at a placement in Morrow County and had asked through channels whether she could visit the people who had come for her, was in the kitchen. Marcus Webb, who was 8 years old and had decided that Felix was his primary person and that wherever Felix was constituted the correct location, was sitting on the kitchen counter eating something that he had been told once not to eat before breakfast and was eating again. Mace, Felix, was standing next to the counter with his arms folded and was not saying anything about it. Rowan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of it. The kitchen was warm in the specific way kitchens were warm when they'd been in use since early morning. Residual heat from the oven, the smell of coffee and something with cinnamon, the particular soft light of a room that had south-facing windows and morning sun. People moved through it in the overlapping patterns of people comfortable enough to occupy a shared space without choreography. Ruth and Sophie at the counter, something with apples. Marcus and Mace in their countertop negotiation. Kelsey at the table with her notebook open, but not the notebook. A different one, new. Its cover plain, the stickers not yet added. She was drawing. She looked up when Rowan came in. "You're late," she said. "I know," he said. "Sorry." She looked at him for a moment with those measuring eyes. Then she looked back at her drawing. "There's coffee," she said. He poured coffee and sat down at the table across from her and didn't look at what she was drawing. It wasn't his to look at unless it was offered. That was a rule he'd arrived at without being told. After a while, she turned the notebook and pushed it across the table. It was a drawing of the barn, a counting error visible through the open stall door. And in the foreground, small but distinct, a figure in a leather cut leaning against the doorframe. It was not a skilled drawing in the technical sense. She was 11 and had not been taught. But it had the quality that mattered more than skill. It had precision. She had drawn what she'd seen with the attention of someone who had spent years training their observation and who expressed it now in lines rather than written notes. He looked at it for a long time. "Can I keep this?" he said. She considered him. "It's for you," she said. "That's why I made it." He folded it carefully along a crease that wouldn't damage the image and put it in the inside pocket of his leather cut, against his chest, which was where things went when they needed to be kept close, and the interior world didn't have a better location for them. Outside, the Harleys stood in the cold morning sun in the gravel drive, and the desert ran out from the Ostrander fence line in all directions toward its own horizon. And the day continued in the way days continued when the worst of what they'd contained had been weathered, not forgotten, not resolved into simple lessons, but integrated, carried differently, made into something that could be lived with because it had been looked at directly and not looked away from. Danny came in from the fence post conversation and poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter beside Mace and looked at the room with the expression of a man taking stock of something he hadn't expected to have. Ruth was talking to Sophie about something involving horses, and Sophie was listening with the specific attention of a girl who had been inside a building for 7 months and was still, in small increments, learning that outside was available and permanent and would not be revoked. Marcus had given up on the counter food and was now sitting on the kitchen floor doing something with a piece of twine that Rowan couldn't identify the purpose of. He was narrating it quietly to himself in the way 8-year-olds narrated things, the running commentary of a child whose interior world was large enough to need external verbalization. Rowan listened to it for a while. The narration. He couldn't make out the specific words, only the rhythm, the particular cadence of a child explaining something to himself that he found genuinely interesting, the tone of someone engaged rather than enduring. He thought about what Mace had said in the hospital waiting room. You show up, you're there, you don't make it complicated. He thought about a gas station with no name on the sign, and a child in a long-sleeved shirt, and the particular survival math in her eyes that he had recognized from the inside, the way you recognize things you'd lived rather than observed. He thought about the bent flame lantern on the back of his cut, the patch he'd worn for 11 years, and had never explained to anyone who asked because the explanation was long and the truth of it was simple. And the simple truth was that the lantern's flame was bent by wind rather than extinguished by it. And that was the entire philosophy. That was everything the Brotherhood had ever been or tried to be. Not unaffected by the weather, not invulnerable, but not out. The flame was bent. It was still burning. He drank his coffee at Ruth Ostrander's kitchen table in the November morning and listened to Marcus Webb narrate something to himself on the floor and watched Kelsey Hart begin adding stickers to the cover of her new notebook, one at a time, with the same careful precision she'd brought to everything. And the world outside the south-facing windows was cold and clear and going nowhere, and neither was he.